Chapter 121. Everyone in the palace was panicking. But Su Qin leisurely came to the crop altar. Logically speaking, the crop altar was a place where the Empire of Tang offered sacrifices to heaven and earth. Ordinary people were forbidden from approaching, but Su Qin was the brother-in-law of the Emperor of Tang. How could the forbidden army guarding the crop altar dare to stop him? It just so happens that today's sign-in opportunity has been refreshed. Let's sign in while I'm at it. Su Qin stood in front of the crop altar with anticipation in his heart. After so many sign-in experiences, Su Qin discovered that the crop altar in the palace should be equivalent to the Bodhi court in the Shaolin temple. It was specially designed for sign-in to obtain treasures that could improve one's strength. For example, innate spirit liquid system sign-in. Su Qin said in his heart. Congratulations to the host for sign-in successfully. Received Blood Bodhi X3. A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. Blood Bodhi? Su Qin's mind merged into the system space and soon found 3 Blood Bodhi that had just appeared in a corner. Blood Bodhi was a strange fruit that was as red as blood. According to the system's introduction, Blood Bodhi had the effect of increasing one's strength and healing serious injuries. Can this thing be eaten? Su Qin returned to the right spring square, sat cross-legged, and took out one of the Blood Bodhi from the system space. Su Qin carefully looked at the Blood Bodhi and found that this strange fruit was crystal clear all over. The flesh of the fruit seemed to be flowing with blood. When Su Qin held it in his hand, he could even feel a boiling heat like magma and hot blood. It's not blood. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Gulp. The next moment, Su Qin directly swallowed the Blood Bodhi in front of him. Well, it's sour and sweet. The taste is not bad, much better than those pills. Su Qin chewed the Blood Bodhi a few times and felt as if he had swallowed a spirit fruit, leaving a lingering fragrance in his mouth. In the end, the juice of the Blood Bodhi turned into wisps of heat and rushed towards Su Qin's limbs and bones. Not bad, not bad. It's about the same as primordial spirit liquid. Su Qin carefully sensed and judged in his heart. The help that 1 Blood Bodhi provided to Su Qin was equivalent to a drop of connate spirit liquid. Apart from that, the biggest difference between the Blood Bodhi and the connate spiritual liquid was that it was more refreshing. As for the Blood Bodhi's other use, it could heal serious injuries. Su Qin hadn't sensed it yet because Su Qin's body had gone through 4 transformations. Coupled with the fact that he had entered the 4th heaven of Arhat, his body was always in peak condition. Even if he suffered any injuries, he could quickly recover. There was no need for the Blood Bodhi. I didn't expect there to be such a surprise this time. Looks like I can sign in at the crop altar a few more times in the future. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. After spending almost a year signing in the entire palace, Su Qin found a total of more than a dozen places where he could repeatedly sign in. The crop altar was one of them. While Su Qin was signing in silently in the imperial palace, Chang and city has long been a chaotic place. Countless martial artists from all over the world gathered here, wanting to witness the battle between 2 peak grade 1 sword Dao great grandmasters. One must know that the battle between the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue in the Emperor of Tang's palace has long been famous. Usually, even a battle between grade 1 great grandmasters is very rare, let alone a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Now that there was such an opportunity, it naturally attracted many martial artists. In an inn in Chang'an City, many martial artists from all over the world were eating and chatting. Who do you think is stronger between the White Cloud City Lord and Shimin Chuexue? A thin man asked. It's hard to say. Another old man shook his head slightly and said, whether it is the White Cloud City Lord or Shimin Chuexue, they are both peak grade 1 great grandmasters. The outcome of the battle between the two depends on who is faster. When these words came out, the others nodded slightly. If it were the other 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, it would take hundreds of moves or even more to determine the winner. Then Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue may only need a few moves. Because swordsmen are indomitable and are good at attacking. With one sword, life and death are basically determined. If you can block it, you will live. If you can't block it, you will die. It is rumored that 2 years ago, 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters fell outside the Emperor of Tang's palace. Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue are fighting again. Will the Empire of Tang reap the benefits? The thin man who spoke at the beginning suddenly thought of something and lowered his voice and continued to ask. Ha! When the old man heard this, he smiled and continued, You don't think that there is a legend in the Emperor of Tang's palace, do you? I did think so at the time. The thin man nodded and said, It should be known that defeating a peak grade 1 Great Grandmaster and killing a peak grade 1 Great Grandmaster are two completely different concepts. A peak grade 1 Great Grandmaster is not a fool. If they can't win, they will naturally escape. What's more, 2 grade 1 Great Grandmasters fell outside the Emperor of Tang's palace at that time. You think too much. The old man shook his head and said, "What kind of existence is a legend? If the Empire of Tang has a legend, I'm afraid it would have already been publicized. How could there be no movement until now?" When the old man said this, the other martial artists around were thoughtful. Yes. If there is a legend standing behind the Empire of Tang, then the Empire of Tang should have begun to unify the countries. Then how do you explain the 2 peak grade 1 Great Grandmasters who fell outside the imperial city? The thin man seemed to be unable to figure this out and still asked. It's very simple. The old man calmly said, "Since the Emperor of Tang ascended the throne 2 years ago, Eunuch Zhao has never appeared in the imperial palace." Now, many people are guessing that it was Eunuch Zhao who stopped King Weiyang and Injubat at that time. In the end, both of them died together. There may be other possibilities. But in any case, with the means of Yi Guqing and Shimin Chueshue, as long as there is no old monster like a legend in the Emperor of Tang's palace, there is nothing to fear. The old man slowly said. So that's how it is. The thin man suddenly understood. The Emperor of Tang's palace. Emperor Li Sheng was sitting on the dragon throne. "Your Majesty, many martial artists have come to Chang'an City. Do you want me to order them to be driven out?" Minister of War bowed and asked. "No need." Emperor Li Sheng thought for a while and shook his head. The Empire of Tang's current energy should be focused on the night of the full moon. As for the martial artists gathered in Chang'an City at this moment, they are not worth mentioning at all. If the Empire of Tang can block Yi Guqing and Shimin Chueshue, these martial artists will naturally not dare to act recklessly. If the Empire of Tang can't block them, it doesn't make sense to drive those martial artists away. How is the mobilization of the army? Emperor Li Sheng asked in a deep voice. "Reporting back to your Majesty, they are all waiting outside Chang'an City. They are only waiting for your Majesty's order to enter the city." Minister of War respectfully said. "That's good." Emperor Li Sheng nodded slightly, his thoughts drifting. No one knows what he is thinking. Chapter 122. Time passed slowly. Soon it was the night of the full moon. Emperor Li Sheng stood on the White Jade Square. Beside him, there were many red-clothed eunuchs guarding to prevent any accidents. "Your Majesty, this place is too dangerous. We can escort your Majesty out of the city quietly. In this way, even if Yi Guqing and Shimin Chueshue really come, they will not threaten your Majesty." Eunuch Lu looked at the sky and whispered. "No need." Emperor Li Sheng shook his head. "The Son of Heaven guards the country. The king dies for the country. If he can't even guard the imperial palace, then there is no point in being the emperor. Since your Majesty has decided so, your Majesty must be safe and sound before this old servant dies." Eunuch Lu said in a deep voice. After a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. A bright moon hung in the sky, releasing bright moonlight. "Is here." At this moment, the Forbidden Army commander was shocked and looked at a certain place. He saw a man in white robes standing on top of a palace like an immortal. Just looking at him from a distance, the Forbidden Army commander felt a slight sting in his eyes, as if he was looking at a sharp sword that can cut through everything. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing. The Forbidden Army commander looked extremely shocked. He did not expect that Yi Guqing would be so strong. Just by his aura, it was enough to make him, a grade 1 Great Grandmaster, unable to look directly at him. "Don't rush to make a move now. Wait for both of them to arrive, then make a move." Emperor Li Sheng glanced at the grade 1 Great Grandmaster beside him and said slowly. "Yes." The Forbidden Army commander said in a low voice. After a while, Shimin Chueshue also appeared above a palace, facing Yi Guqing from a distance. "You're late." Yi Guqing looked at Shimin Chueshue and said faintly. At their level, whether it is about themselves or the outside world, they have already grasped it to the extreme. "Yes, I'm late." Shimin Chueshue admitted frankly. 2 years ago, 2 peak grade 1 fell here. At that time, I thought that a grade 1 great perfection had appeared here. Shimin Chueshue's eyes turned slightly and scanned the Emperor of Tang's palace. But from the looks of it now, there isn't. Shimin Chueshue shook his head slightly. He had been obsessed with the way of the sword since he was young. He had a heart of the sword and could sense any danger that might exist nearby. It was precisely because of his sword heart that he had helped him through countless calamities. However, at this moment, When Shimenchui Shui stood in the imperial palace, his heart of the sword was as calm as ever, without any warning. If there really was a grade 1 great perfection in the imperial palace, then his sword heart should have felt something by now. Although grade 1 great perfection is powerful, as long as it has not transcended the scope of the martial Tao, it cannot escape the perception of the sword heart. Yes. There is no grade 1 great perfection here. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing lowered his head and glanced at the ground. He said calmly, "Looks like before we spar with the sword, we'll have to get rid of some ants." With Yi Guqing's eyesight, he naturally discovered many grade 1 great grandmasters lying in ambush in the imperial palace. Indeed. I think so too. Shimenchui Shui nodded. Although he is obsessed with the sword and has nothing else in his heart except for the sword, he is not a fool. It is impossible for him to give others a chance to injure both sides. This time he and Yi Guqing were discussing the way of the sword. In the end, no matter who survives, they will be seriously injured. At this time, if he was surrounded by a group of grade 1 great grandmasters, his life would be in danger. In that case, make your move. The long sword behind Yi Guqing suddenly let out a sword cry, and then a terrifying sword light gathered and slashed in the direction of the white jade square. Not good. The Forbidden Army commander found that something was wrong and immediately took Emperor Li Sheng to retreat in a certain direction. The rest of the grade 1 great grandmasters did the same. Under the sword light of Yi Guqing, they did not have any thoughts of resisting. The gap is too big. Emperor Li Sheng also recovered at this moment. In his eyes, Yi Guqing, the White Cloud City Lord standing above the palace, and the other grade 1 great grandmasters were on two completely different levels. Emperor Li Sheng has not seen a peak grade 1 great grandmaster before. Before the Emperor of Tang died, he had seen Eunuch Zhao's methods. But compared with Eunuch Zhao, the White Cloud City Lord in front of him seems to be much more terrifying. Mobilize the army into the city. Also, all grade 1 great grandmasters start setting up the formation. Emperor Li Sheng took a deep breath and issued several orders in a row. Whether it is Yi Guqing or Shimenchui Shui, neither of them has taken the step to become a legend. Since that is the case, they may be exhausted to death by the sea of people. This is also Emperor Li Sheng's last confidence. And at this time, White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing frowned slightly, as if he was frowning at the fact that he had to deal with the grade 1 great grandmasters below. Brother Yi, the Emperor of Tang's palace still has a lot of heritage. Shimenchui Shui's voice just fell. Dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters stood in a certain position, constantly changing, forming a huge net, trying to trap Yi Guqing and Shimenchui Shui. This was also Emperor Li Sheng's original plan. He does not expect the dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters to be able to contend against Yi Guqing and Shimenchui Shui. He only wants to trap the two for a while, wait for the army to enter the city, and then use the sea of people to exhaust the other party. Heritage. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing smiled contemptuously, and slowly pulled out the long sword behind him. Under my sword, everything will be destroyed. The next moment, Wang. A sword light 10 times more terrifying than before condensed, and a terrifying sword intent enveloped the surroundings. At the same time, East Palace Right Spring Square. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. After a year of cultivation, I finally made some progress. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Then, Su Qin seemed to feel something and raised his head slightly, looking in the direction of the White Jade Square. They really dare to come? Su Qin shook his head. He was immersed in cultivation just now and neglected his perception of the outside world for a while. Since they are here, then stay. Su Qin didn't move. He just raised his right hand and casually released a wisp of sword light towards the White Jade Square. White Jade Square. As White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing pulled out the long sword behind him, the entire White Jade Square was filled with extremely fierce sword chi. The grade 1 great grandmasters who had just arranged the great array felt their scalps explode, and they could not continue to follow the array. It's over. Emperor Li Sheng's heart thumped. The White Cloud City Lord's sword light enveloped the entire White Jade Square, and naturally included him. Emperor Li Sheng's original plan was to use dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters to delay Yi Guqing and Shimenchui Shui with the help of the array, and then let the Patriarch army exhaust the other party. But he did not expect that before the army entered the city, they would already be unable to hold on. Kill for me. White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing slowly waved his long sword, and was about to cut down. Suddenly, it was at this moment. The White Cloud City Lord seemed to feel something, and raised his head and looked in a certain direction in the depths of the imperial palace. However, with this glance, the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing saw an unforgettable scene. He saw an invisible sword light coming out of nowhere and quickly slashing towards him. The moment he saw this sword light, the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing felt that the heavens and earth immediately began to turn illusory and became unreal. The same was true for his body, his internal strength, and his divine sense. All that was left was a faint and fearful thought as he faced this extremely pure sword light all by himself. Chapter 123. Chang'an City. Imperial Palace. On the White Jade Square. Swish. Yi Guqing only saw the sword light coming from a certain position in the Imperial Palace, and he felt that his line of sight was completely occupied by it. Everything became illusory as if he was in an unreal dream. Crack, crack. Cracks appeared on the long sword in Yi Guqing's hand, which continued to spread and spread to the entire sword in an instant. Brother Yi Yu? Not far away, Shimen Chueshua's pupils shrank, and he subconsciously looked in the direction of Yi Guqing's gaze. That is. Shimen Chueshua did not react. The next moment. Then the sword light swept past. Wong. Yi Guqing and Shimen Chueshua's thoughts began to fall, and they fell into boundless darkness. And at this moment, the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the White Jade Square looked on helplessly as the two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters fell from the sky and landed on the White Jade Square. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Many Grade 1 Great Grandmasters looked at each other. They were at a loss. They had thought of all possibilities just now and even thought that they would fall under Yi Guqing's sword. However, no one had expected this to happen even in their wildest dreams. Your Majesty, what should we do now? A deputy commander of the Forbidden Army struggled out of shock and looked at Emperor Li Sheng and couldn't help but ask. Eunuch Lu, go and take a look. Emperor Li Sheng thought for a moment and immediately said, As you wish. Eunuch Lu bowed slightly and began to slowly walk towards the place where Yi Guqing and Shimen Chueshua fell. The other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters surrounded them. In this way, even if Yi Guqing and Shimen Chueshua played tricks, they could quickly react and give a thunderous blow in the shortest time. After a while, Eunuch Lu quickly rushed back and whispered to Emperor Li Sheng, Your Majesty, they are dead. Dead? Emperor Li Sheng was silent. The other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters were also in disbelief. Two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Sword Dao died just like that? Your Majesty, perhaps it's the senior who took action 2 years ago? At this moment, the commander of the Forbidden Army suddenly thought of something and said in a low voice. As soon as he said this, Emperor Li Sheng's thoughts raced. 2 years ago, Prince Qin colluded with the Southern Ming Empire and fought with King Wuyang and Yin Jiubat until two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters arrived outside the imperial city. At that time, the new Emperor Li Sheng was already in despair. No one in the entire imperial palace could stop the two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters. However, at that moment, the sound of a zither rang out. After the sound of the zither, the song came to an end. The new Emperor Li Sheng vaguely sensed that there was a peerless master in the imperial palace, but he had never seen him before, so he could not be sure. We understand. Emperor Li Sheng looked pensive. Although he did not know why that peerless expert had been staying in the palace, since the other party had saved the Empire of Tang 3 or 4 times, it was obvious that the other party had a lot of goodwill towards the Empire of Tang. Could it be a living ancestor? Emperor Li Sheng guessed in his heart. The Empire of Tang has been established for more than 500 years, and the great ancestor is a legend. It is not impossible for there to be an ancestor hiding in the imperial palace. Okay. You all can leave. Emperor Li Sheng pondered for a moment and ordered. As you wish. The Grade 1 Great Grandmasters looked at each other, unable to hide the shock in their hearts, and retreated one after another. They originally thought that today would be a hard battle, and that many Grade 1 Great Grandmasters would fall, but they did not expect things to develop so quickly. After the imperial palace gradually calmed down, the martial artists who came to Chang'an City early were suddenly puzzled. Although they came to Chang'an City, they could not get close to the imperial palace. They could only feel the aura fluctuations coming from the imperial palace from a distance. The battle between two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, even if it's just a casual aura, is enough to spread throughout the entire Chang'an City. These martial artists did not dare to ask to watch the battle between two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters face to face. First, because entering Chang'an City is already their limit. If they want to get close to the imperial palace, are the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Empire of Tang just decorations? Second, even if the Empire of Tang allowed them to enter the Imperial Palace to watch the battle, no one would dare to do so. The battle between peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters is so fierce that even a casual aftershock is enough to kill most martial artists. These martial artists came to watch, but no one is willing to entrust their life and death in the hands of others. However, even if they can't watch the battle between two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, just feeling their aura from a distance is enough to benefit them endlessly. However, what made it difficult for many martial artists to understand was that the aura coming from the Imperial Palace only lasted for a moment before it completely disappeared. What's going on? Yes, are Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue going to fight? Could it be that they are lying to us? No, what kind of status do Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue have? Since they are going to fight in the Imperial Palace of the Emperor of Tang, it is impossible for them not to do it. Many martial artists were discussing, their tone puzzled. At this moment, an old man with white hair and beard stood up. Maybe Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue have already arrived. The old man with white hair and beard is a martial artist in the upper realm. As soon as he spoke, the surrounding martial artists quieted down. What do you mean? A martial artist couldn't help but ask. The old man with white hair and beard was silent for a long time before he said a sentence. They are here, but whether they can fight or not is another matter. When these words came out, all the martial artists were shocked. At this moment they all understood what the old man meant. Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue may have been suppressed by someone in the Imperial Palace of the Emperor of Tang the moment they appeared, and they did not fight at all. There is a great terror in the Imperial Palace of the Emperor of Tang, the old man with white hair and beard finally said slowly. Many martial artists looked at each other, inexplicably shocked. Imperial Palace. Right Spring Square. After Su Qin casually slashed out a sword light, he no longer cared about what happened in the Imperial Palace. With the sword light he just slashed out, not to mention that Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue were only peak Grade 1 who had transformed twice, even a Grade 1 great perfection would not be able to block it. After a year of hard work, I finally took a little step forward. Su Qin sat cross-legged, feeling the changes in his aura. Since Su Qin entered the 4th heavenly layer a year ago, even if he took a lot of innate spirit liquid, blood bodhi, glazed golden core and other treasures, his strength was still very slow. But just now he had a breakthrough. If the 4th heavenly layer Arhat realm is divided into 3 levels, then Su Qin has entered the 2nd level at this moment. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin nodded slightly, quite satisfied. Immediately afterward, Su Qin slowly got up and walked out of the Right Spring Square. Chapter 124. Although I took a small step, but there is still a distance from peak 4th heavenly layer. Su Qin slowly walked out of the Right Spring Square. His thoughts fluctuated as he thought silently. At this moment he deeply felt the difficulty of martial Dao cultivation. Even he, who constantly takes various divine pills and spirit medicines, progressed so slowly, let alone the other venerable Arhat and legends. If there is no particularly great opportunity, I'm afraid that they will spend their whole life at the 1st and 2nd heavenly layers, or at most the 3rd heavenly layer. Although there is a distance from peak 4th heavenly layer, according to my current cultivation speed, I can almost reach it in at most 10 years. Su Qin estimated in his heart. Reaching peak 4th heavenly layer in 10 years is based on the premise that Su Qin does not sign in a treasure of a higher level than blood bodhi and innate spirit liquid in the next 10 years. If he signs in a higher level of divine pills and spirit medicines, the 10 years here will be greatly shortened. It's a pity whether it is innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi, they are all treasures of the Arhat level. Those below Arhat can't take them at all? Su Qin shook his head slightly. Even if it is a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, if they rashly take innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi, they will only end up exploding and dying. Because the energy in innate spirit liquid and blood bodhi is too huge, far beyond the limit that a Grade 9 martial Dao can bear. Time passed slowly. Su Qin returned to his normal life again, signing in every day, cultivating, and occasionally chatting with the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng for a while. As for the family Su, whether it is Su Shimin, Su Sungho, Su Qingyu, or Su Qin secretly used Arhat's true essence to change their muscles and cleanse their marrow. In the martial Dao of this world, having sufficient resources was not enough to create a supreme expert. Apart from resources, comprehension ability and temperament were also indispensable. The reason why the dozens of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the Emperor of Tang's palace have such achievements is not only because of the support of the resources of the Emperor of Tang's palace, but also because of their own good perception and good temperament. Among the people of the family Su, Su Shimin's vitality began to decline. Coupled with the loss of his drive, even if Su Qin provided more cultivation resources, it would be difficult for him to enter the upper realm. As for Su Sungho and Su Qingyu, they did not have the heart for martial arts. Similarly, their achievements in martial arts were limited and could not be made up for by cultivation resources. After realizing this, Su Qin did not have much hope for the people of the family Su in the martial Tao, and directly used his true essence to change their muscles and cleanse their marrow. Anyway, even a grade 1 great grandmaster can live for less than 200 years at most. After Su Qin's muscle tendon changing and marrow cleansing, the people of the family Su can live for more than 100 years. The gap is not very big. On this day, Su Qin had just finished his cultivation when the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and Su Yueyun came to the right spring square with joy. Su Qin glanced at Su Yueyun, and a smile appeared on his face. Third brother Yunyang is pregnant? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's tone was so excited that he almost danced with joy. I see. Su Qin nodded slightly. At first glance when he saw Su Yueyun, he felt another weak life aura in her body. If it weren't for third brother Yunyang and I are afraid. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Su Qin with gratitude. As early as when Su Yueyun first entered the imperial palace, the imperial doctors in the palace found that Yin Qi had entered her body, making it difficult for her to give birth to a dragon child. If it weren't for a prescription written by Su Qin that removed the Yin Qi in Su Yueyun's body, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, would have to adopt a child from another imperial family. Although the adopted child is also the blood of the imperial family after all, it is not his own flesh and blood. There is a difference between being close and distant. Soon, after a few more words, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, took Su Yueyun back and prepared to let the imperial doctors brew some tonic soup. In response, Su Qin just smiled. Although Su Yueyun was now in her 30s, if it was an ordinary woman getting pregnant at this age, it would be very dangerous. However, Su Yueyun was a martial artist, and her qi and blood were stronger than ordinary people. Moreover, Su Qin had secretly helped her change her muscles and cleanse her marrow, so it was impossible for anything to go wrong. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 10 months had passed. On this day there were palace maids and eunuchs coming in and out of Cunning Palace. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was anxiously waiting. Your Majesty. Her Majesty will be fine. Eunuch Lu could not help but whisper. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, heard this and did not say anything, only shaking his head. Although the imperial doctors said that Su Yueyun's body was very good and that she had enough qi and blood, there would be no problem giving birth to a dragon child. However, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was still worried. How is it? How much longer? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at a palace maid who had just come out and asked. This little palace maid was obviously shocked. She did not expect the Emperor of Tang to ask her personally. She stammered, Your Majesty, don't worry, Ma. Her Majesty is doing very well inside. Very well? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, breathed a sigh of relief. I'm going to be a father soon? The Emperor of Tang clenched his fists, full of joy. And at this moment, Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and looked in the direction of Cunning Palace. Little sister. Su Qin took a step and disappeared. When Su Qin appeared again, he was already standing outside Cunning Palace. Your Majesty? Eunuch Lu was about to comfort Li Sheng again when he inadvertently glanced at Su Qin, who was standing quietly not far away. This is. Cold sweat quickly emerged on Eunuch Lu's forehead. Because before Su Qin appeared, he didn't notice anything at all. As a grade 1 great grandmaster, Eunuch Lu always maintains his perception of the outside world, and no movement can be hidden from him. But just now, from the moment Su Qin appeared until now, Eunuch Lu did not notice anything strange at all. It was as if Su Qin stood there from beginning to end and did not move, like a ghost. What's going on? Eunuch Lu was uneasy, and he almost thought that there was a problem with his cultivation. What's wrong with you? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, noticed the change in Eunuch Lu and was about to say a few words when he saw Su Qin not far away. Third brother. You're here too. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, walked in front of Su Qin and immediately said, Just now the palace maid said that it was going well inside. It should be soon. I know. Su Qin nodded. At this moment, a palace maid rushed out and said loudly, Your Majesty, the Empress gave birth to a boy and a girl, a pair of twins. Is Yuner okay? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, immediately walked into the Cunning Palace. Su Qin also followed in. Inside the Cunning Palace, Su Yueyun was lying on the bed with a pale face. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was accompanying Su Yueyun at this moment. Third brother, Su Yueyun saw Su Qin, squeezed out a smile and was about to speak. Don't move. Su Qin shook his head slightly, stopped Su Yueyun and walked to the bed. In the next moment, Su Qin flicked his finger, and a trace of Arhat's true essence merged into Su Yueyun's body, slowly nourishing it. Chapter 125. With the influx of true essence into her body, Su Yueyun only felt sleepy and fell asleep in a short while. Russell. Yunyang has suffered. After the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng accompanied Su Yueyun for a while, they focused their attention on the twins next to them. Su Qin also glanced at them. Huh. Su Qin was surprised. These two children were just born and their skin was wrinkled, but when Su Qin glanced at them, he found that the boy was normal, but the girl had a sense of transparency. Martial Dao genius? Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Generally speaking, when normal people are born, their meridians are blocked, and the martial Dao cultivation is to slowly open up these blocked meridians. Of course, there are also some people in the world who are born with transparency. If such people embark on the martial Dao, they will advance by leaps and bounds, at least there will be no problem in entering the upper realm. Su Qin didn't expect that Su Yueyun's child would be such a martial Dao genius. However, although Su Qin was surprised, he didn't feel surprised. At Su Qin's level, he has long surpassed the concept of genius. Even a Buddhist heart like Jianghu is nothing in Su Qin's eyes. 4 martial artists having superior qualifications will only make them spend less time on the road of martial Dao cultivation, but whether they can reach the end or even complete the transformation, it is useless to rely on qualifications alone. Su Qin stayed for a while and after confirming that Su Yueyun was fine, he prepared to return to the right spring square. As for the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng, they were looking at the twins with joy. Su Qin walked out of the cunning palace slowly and stopped when he passed by the white jade square. It just so happens that I haven't signed in today. Su Qin glanced at the white jade square and said in his heart, "System, sign in." Divine ability? Su Qin's spirit suddenly shook. After signing in for more than 30 years, Su Qin had obtained countless secret manuals, elixirs, natural treasures and so on. However, there was only one divine ability. It was the Eye of Truth that he obtained from signing in at the Thousand Buddhas Hall. To obtain a divine ability every 30 years, one could see how rare divine abilities were. But now, in front of the white jade square, Su Qin once again obtained a divine ability. I didn't expect it to be a divine ability. Su Qin's eyes lit up as his thoughts fluctuated. Rebirth of flesh? The introduction of this ability flashed through Su Qin's mind. Flesh and blood rebirth, as the name suggested, was a divine ability related to the physical body. Even if his physical body was shattered, as long as his vital parts were not injured, he could use this ability to quickly recover. What did this mean? Almost half an immortal body. Although Venerable Arhat and martial arts legends could regenerate broken limbs, the so-called regenerating of broken limbs was a huge consumption even for Venerable Arhat and martial arts legends. And it required a lot of time to recuperate, from a few months to a few years or even 10 years. And in the end, it even consumed Venerable Arhat's origin. But flesh and blood rebirth was different. Not only was the recovery of the physical body far superior to Venerable Arhat's regenerating of broken limbs, but its speed was also much faster. With this divine ability and his terrifying physical body, Su Qin's combat strength would at least skyrocket by a level. With this divine ability, I have one more trump card. Su Qin was extremely satisfied. Flesh and blood rebirth could not only be used to kill enemies, but also to cultivate. Before obtaining the flesh and blood divine ability, Su Qin cultivated carefully, afraid that he would damage his physical body and plant hidden dangers. But now, with flesh and blood rebirth, even if his physical body was damaged, wouldn't it be solved by using the divine ability to recover once? It's said that above the flesh and blood rebirth, there's another great divine ability, blood rebirth. Su Qin's expression was filled with emotion and he was fascinated. If flesh and blood rebirth still had vital parts and could only be considered half an immortal body, then blood rebirth was almost immortal. As long as there was a drop of blood left, he could quickly recover. It was comparable to gods, demons, immortals, and Buddhas. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. In these 3 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had completely stabilized his position on the throne. Through continuously issuing government orders and displaying his strength, he had vaguely brought the Empire of Tang to prosperity. Third brother. On this day the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was still standing outside the Right Spring Square. He waved at Su Qin. Next to the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, stood a boy and a girl. They were about 3 or 4 years old. Their big eyes were clear and they were very cute. This boy and girl were the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng and Su Yuanyun's children. Now that 3 years had passed they had grown up a lot. The boy was called Li Yuan and the girl was called Li Wan. Su Qin walked out slowly. Third uncle. Li Yuan and Li Wan called out in unison. Their big eyes were filled with curiosity. Third brother Yuan, our angered grand tutor again today. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Li Yuan and said helplessly. Father. Li Yuan obviously knew that he was wrong. He lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. It's normal for children to be naughty, Su Qin didn't care and said casually. Sigh. Of course it's normal for children to be naughty. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, sighed and patted Li Yuan's head, but Yuaner can't do that. He's my only son and he's destined to sit on my throne. Any negligence will cause the people to suffer. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head slightly. He still valued Li Yuan, and didn't want Li Yuan to make any big mistakes in the future. There will be people to make mistakes in the future. We just need to live well in the present. Su Qin looked at Li Yuan and said lightly. That's true. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, thought that it made sense. He wasn't a god. How could he predict what would happen in the future? Third brother, why don't you be Yuaner's grand tutor? With your guidance Yuaner will definitely be much better. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly thought of something and said with interest. He had long realized that the fearless Li Yuan was afraid of Su Qin. As long as Su Qin was present, Li Yuan didn't dare to do anything overboard. He was as obedient as he could be. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, felt that nothing was too strange. Forget it. I'm used to being free and undisciplined. Su Qin rejected without even thinking. He came to the palace to sign in and cultivate, not to teach children how to behave. Besides, Su Qin was. Chapter 126. So I'm already an uncle. Su Qin looked at the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng's backs as they left and couldn't help but laugh. Unknowingly, he had already been in the Emperor of Tang's palace for 5 or 6 years. In these 5 or 6 years, Su Qin had watched the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng change from an uneasy new emperor to a wise ruler who could dictate the imperial court. Bang. In addition, in the past few years, Su Qin has obtained countless heavenly materials, earthly treasures and spirit pills. What a pity. I'm still a little bit away from reaching the peak of the 4th heaven. Su Qin sighed softly as his thoughts fluctuated. No rush. I still have a lot of time so I can take it slow. Su Qin wasn't anxious at all. Instead he became calmer and calmer. For Su Qin he only needed to sign in step by step and he would continue to become stronger. What was there to worry about? Not only was the palace safe but no one would disturb him. For Su Qin it was already a holy land for cultivation. In the past few years, I've used most of my sign-in opportunities at the crop altar. I've obtained thousands of blood bodhi and thousands of drops of innate spirit liquid, as well as various other treasures and spirit medicines. According to my current consumption, these are enough for me to use for at least 5 years. Can I place my sign-in opportunities elsewhere? For example, the White Jade Square? Let's see if I can get another divine ability. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and he suddenly had a plan in his heart. At the crop altar, there was a 60% chance of getting innate spirit liquid, 30% chance of getting blood bodhi, and 10% chance of getting other things. Moreover, the amount of innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi obtained each time was different. For example, Su Qin once received 20 drops of innate spirit liquid, and sometimes he only received 1 drop. As for blood bodhi it was similar but Su Qin received 12 blood bodhi at most. At the same time, in the longevity hall, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at the information in his hand with a gloomy expression. I can tolerate it if the vassals don't obey the Emperor's orders, but what do they mean by secretly adding fuel to the fire and stopping my orders? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said word by word. Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please calm down. Many officials knelt on the ground and said loudly. Calm down? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head slightly and said with a cold expression. If I continue to calm down, this position will be directly given to the kings. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly stood up and paced back and forth. The vassals of the Empire of Tang had their own troops and were overbearing in their own territories. Li Sheng had long wanted to take action against them. Tell me, how confident are we if we remove the vassals? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, glanced at the officials and said, "Remove the vassals?" All the officials were shocked. Removing the vassals was not a joke. The 10 vassals of the Empire of Tang were united. Once Li Sheng touched one of them, it would affect the whole group. At that time, the 10 vassals would rebel together, and the Empire of Tang would be caught in the flames of war. "Your Majesty, please be careful about removing the vassals," some officials begged bitterly. The Emperor of Tang, didn't he know the hidden dangers of the vassals? But why didn't they remove the vassals? It was because they were worried about the consequences of removing the vassals. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at the reactions of the officials and sighed softly in his heart. In fact, he could understand the thoughts of the officials. If the vassals were not removed, the vassals would still stay in their own territories. But once the vassals were removed, the vassals would be forced into a corner. Who could predict what would happen to them? "You can all leave. I want to rest for a while." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, waved his hand, lowered his eyes and sat back on the dragon throne. Since he ascended the throne several years ago, various government decrees have been implemented continuously, which has greatly improved the Empire of Tang. But the more the hidden dangers of the vassals were revealed. If the Empire of Tang wanted to go further and achieve a true prosperity, it must first solve the problem of the vassals. As long as the vassals existed, the Empire of Tang would be firmly imprisoned in place. "As you wish." The officials looked at each other and left the immortal palace one after another. After all the officials left, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, returned to the right spring square with a pot of wine. "Third brother, I'm here again." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, carried a pot of wine and found Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, usually did not drink because he felt that wine would affect his thoughts. But today, because of the vassals, he was really depressed and wanted to drink to relieve his worries. "Third brother, do you think I'm wrong to remove the vassals?" The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, whispered. If he and the 10 vassals compromised, the Empire of Tang could be at peace for a while, but what about after that? The 10 vassals were always a threat to the Empire of Tang. In the future, when the 10 vassals were fully developed and took the initiative to rebel, it would probably be the end of the Empire of Tang. In that case, why not take the initiative to the Empire of Tang? Instead, wait for the vassals to rebel? Removing the vassals is naturally not a problem. Su Qin saw at a glance what the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was worried about. He said casually, "But you need to be prepared for the consequences after removing the vassals." In short, can the Empire of Tang bear the backlash of the 10 vassals? Su Qin's tone was simple, but he directly pointed out the biggest problem of the Empire of Tang. Did they have enough confidence to remove the vassals? Since the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, ascended the throne, the Empire of Tang gradually began to prosper. But to prosper and to prosper were two different things. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, thought for a while and asked, "Third brother, do you think that the Empire of Tang is not capable of removing the vassals?" "You're too anxious." Su Qin shook his head slightly. He had lived in the palace for a long time. Although he was usually too lazy to take care of things, from Su Qin's point of view, the Empire of Tang still needed at least 10 years to accumulate enough foundation before it was qualified to propose removing the vassals. "I'm too anxious." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was thoughtful, and his forehead gradually overflowed with cold sweat. "Thank you, third brother, for teaching me." The Emperor of Tang bowed deeply to Su Qin and quickly understood that he had neglected one point. He was too anxious. Governing a big country was like cooking a small fish. It needed to be done step by step. If he wanted to achieve it in one step, not only would it not be a good thing, but it might also be a disaster. "It's okay." Su Qin replied casually. He just gave the Emperor of Tang a few words. As for what to do, it still depended on the Emperor of Tang's grasp of the situation. "By the way, third brother." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, seemed to have thought of something and immediately said, "Yesterday I went to the National Treasury and found something strange. I still can't figure it out. I invited many people to take a look, but they don't understand it very well. Third brother, you're knowledgeable. You can take a look." The Emperor of Tang said as he put down his wine glass and took out a wooden box from his arms. This wooden box was extremely exquisite. There were faint dark golden patterns on it. It was extremely extraordinary. Su Qin did not care much at first, but the moment he saw the wooden box, his expression froze slightly. His eyes instantly focused on the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box. Chapter 127. This is heaven and earth array? The moment Su Qin's eyes fell on the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box, various thoughts flashed through his mind. The wooden box in the hands of the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was relatively ordinary. It was carved out of 100-year-old sandalwood. To ordinary people it might be worth thousands of gold pieces, but compared to the mysterious dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box, it was nothing. In Su Qin's eyes, the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box were like a black hole, constantly concealing all the fluctuations around it. Unless Su Qin saw it with his own eyes, even if his divine sense scanned thousands of times, he would not be able to discover the wooden box at all. To be able to inscribe a heaven and earth array on a mere wooden box, this person's strength is probably far beyond that of Tuo Erahan from 900 years ago. Su Qin's thoughts raced as he thought silently. Before Tuo Erahan passed away, he had set up a heaven and earth array in his secret chamber to avoid being scanned by others' divine sense. But the heaven and earth array that Tuo Erahan left behind was based on the stone door outside the secret chamber. The stone door was a few meters wide, enough to set up a heaven and earth array. But this wooden box was only the size of a palm. To inscribe a heaven and earth array on it was extremely difficult. It was not something that a first heaven arhat could do. At least a third heaven, Su Qin guessed in his mind, and became more and more curious about this wooden box. Su Qin wanted to know what kind of treasure was worth a third heaven arhat expert's effort to protect it with a heaven and earth array so that it would not be discovered by outsiders. "Third brother, are you interested in this?" The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin's expression and asked casually. "A little." Su Qin nodded slightly and said. Ever since Su Qin had transmigrated to the present, he had only met two existences at the level of arhat. One was Tuo Erahan, and the other was the Devil Buddha. Now that he had encountered a third person, how could Su Qin remain indifferent? "Since third brother is interested, I'll give it to third brother." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, casually handed the wooden box to Su Qin. "By the way, third brother, I heard from the old man guarding the national treasury that this wooden box seems to be related to the great ancestor, but I can't say exactly what it is." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, couldn't help but remind him. "Great ancestor?" Su Qin narrowed his eyes. When he saw this wooden box, he guessed that it might have been left behind by the great ancestor, the founder of the Empire of Tang, because in the 500 years of the Empire of Tang, only the great ancestor had entered the martial arts legend realm and had the ability to set up the heaven and earth formation. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said a few more words and left. Su Qin sat cross-legged and looked at the wooden box in front of him quietly. The wooden box had no gaps, as if it was a hole, but when Su Qin gently touched it with his right hand, it suddenly opened. Bus. An inexplicable wave spread in all directions. If it weren't for the heaven and earth formation in the right spring square, this wave would have spread to the entire palace by now. What a strong divine will. Su Qin frowned slightly and looked at the crystal-clear jade pendant in the wooden box. This jade pendant was transparent, and there was a faint mist rising, but Su Qin felt a lot of divine will waves from the jade pendant. Interesting. Su Qin also released his divine will and approached the jade pendant. Boom. Just when Su Qin's divine will came into contact with the jade pendant, he felt as if he had come to another world. This world was extremely illusory, but in the center, there was a huge figure wearing a dragon robe and standing upright. "Why don't you kneel when you see me?" The figure in the dragon robe slowly raised his head and looked at Su Qin. In an instant, the entire illusory world suddenly boiled, and endless power gathered and suppressed Su Qin. "You dare to attack me with a mere incomplete divine will?" In the face of such a shocking scene, Su Qin's expression did not change at all, because he knew that everything in front of him was just an illusion created by the divine will in the pendant. Perhaps a martial artist who had just entered the martial arts legend realm would be shocked. But for Su Qin, a venerable arhat who was close to level 4 perfected, it was just a reflection of the moon in the water. It would break with a touch. The next moment, Su Qin slowly took a step forward. Suddenly, crack. Crack. The entire illusory world seemed to be under some kind of unimaginable pressure, and it began to shatter and dissipate. In a moment it completely collapsed. In the right spring square. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and looked at the jade pendant in the wooden box with interest. Why did the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang leave such a huge divine will behind? Su Qin touched his chin and his eyes were thoughtful. The divine will in the pendant was so huge that Su Qin wondered if the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang had left most of his divine will here. Unfortunately, through the divine will in the pendant, I have confirmed that the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang should have completely fallen. Su Qin fell into deep thought. If the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang was still alive, the divine will in the pendant would definitely not be as stiff as it was just now. Thinking of this, Su Qin shook his head slightly. More than 500 years ago, the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang established the Empire of Tang and crossed the sea. Since then, there had been no news of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang for 500 years. If the great ancestor is not dead, this divine will is useless to me. But he has completely fallen, and the divine will in the pendant has become an ownerless object. I can completely refine and absorb it. Su Qin's heart was burning. According to Su Qin's estimation, if he could completely refine the huge divine will in the pendant, he could at least improve his divine will by 5% to 10%. With Su Qin's current strength, it was extremely difficult to improve even a little, let alone 5% to 10%. Moreover, compared to the growth of the body in true essence, it was much more difficult to improve the divine will. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang left such a huge divine will behind. I'm afraid he left a backup plan. If he fell overseas, could he achieve rebirth through this divine will? Su Qin guessed in his heart. This was the only explanation he could think of. For ordinary people, the death of the body is true death. Even grade 1 great perfection is no exception. But in the eyes of many legends and venerable Arhat, the death of the body does not mean complete death. For example, the devil Buddha from 900 years ago abandoned his body and lived for nearly 1,000 years as a demonic will. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang probably had the same idea as the devil Buddha, leaving such a huge divine will behind as a backup plan after his fall. Unfortunately, even so, the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang still fell, and the divine will he left in the pendant was not activated. Su Qin sighed, and he became more vigilant about the depths of the endless ocean. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang was a third heavenly layer legend. Even he fell in the depths of the endless ocean, and he did not even have time to activate his backup plan. It can be imagined how terrifying the danger he faced was. Su Qin's strength is far beyond that of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang, but there is no guarantee that there is no existence in the depths of the endless ocean that is on par with or even surpasses Su Qin. Chapter 128. I still have to be cautious. Su Qin sat cross-legged, his mind fluctuating. Although he has countless trump cards including the Buddha's palm, the most powerful divine art of Buddhism, it's better not to use them. If one day Su Qin is really forced to use the Buddha's palm, it means that there is no way out. In the end, I'm still not strong enough. If I enter the 9th heaven of Arhat or transcend Arhat, who in the world can threaten me? Su Qin made a decision in his heart. From now on, I have to refine the divine sense in the pendant as soon as possible and transform it into my own strength. Su Qin picked up the jade pendant and merged his divine sense into it, slowly refining the huge divine sense inside. Refining divine sense is different from swallowing pills. Even if the original owner of the divine sense dies, it is still something else. If Su Qin wants to absorb it without any side effects, he needs to refine it bit by bit. Next, Su Qin once again returned to his previous life. However, compared to before, Su Qin spent all his time refining the divine sense in the jade pendant except for signing in. At most 2 months, I can almost finish refining it. Su Qin judged in his heart. 2 months in exchange for a 5% to 10% increase in divine sense is definitely worth it. And just as Su Qin was slowly refining the divine sense in the jade pendant. Third uncle, we're here. Outside the right spring square, a young voice came. Su Qin looked up and saw the 2 children of the Emperor of Tang, Li Yuan and Li Yuan, standing outside. Beside Li Yuan and Li Yuan, a personal eunuch and a palace maid were standing with their backs bowed. It was obvious that they were the ones who had brought the 2 of them here. Why are you here? Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and asked casually. Third uncle, it's too boring in the palace. Li Yuan said in a clear voice. Why aren't you saying anything? Li Yuan turned around and looked at Li Yuan, who was hiding behind her. He dragged him in front of Su Qin and said, Third uncle, father asked us to visit you often. Third uncle? Li Yuan braced himself and said. For some reason, Li Yuan, who had always been fearless and dared to pull on the Grand Tutor's beard, felt fear in his heart when he saw Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang? Su Qin shook his head slightly. Although he had directly rejected the Emperor of Tang's proposal and didn't want to have too much to do with Li Yuan and Li Yuan, it was clear that the Emperor of Tang still wanted his children to be closer to Su Qin. Third uncle, I always feel that your place is so comfortable, more comfortable than any other place in the palace. Li Yuan blinked and said, Really? Su Qin didn't feel the slightest bit strange. Li Yuan was a martial arts genius. His innate meridians were clear, and he could faintly feel the fluctuations of heaven and earth essence qi. Su Qin's residence, the Right Spring Square, had countless heaven and earth arrays. Although these heaven and earth arrays didn't have the effect of gathering heaven and earth essence qi, they could still attract some essence qi. That was why Li Yuan felt a little different. Do you like martial arts? Su Qin glanced at Li Yuan and asked casually. Martial arts? Are you talking about those eunuchs flying around? Li Yuan's eyes lit up and he immediately said, Of course Waner likes it. If you like it, you can tell your father that you want to practice martial arts. Su Qin looked at Li Yuan and said lightly. With Li Yuan's martial arts talent, it would be a pity if he didn't practice martial arts. However, Su Qin didn't intend to teach Li Yuan martial arts personally. There were so many martial artists in the palace, and there were even dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters. Su Qin didn't need to do anything. After a while, Li Yuan and Li Yuan were taken back by the eunuchs and maids. After Li Yuan and Li Yuan left, Su Qin's heart suddenly moved, and he looked up in a certain direction. The brand is about to dissipate. When I finish refining the divine sense, I will take some time to go to Nanzhao. Su Qin's eyes were calm and he thought silently in his heart. A few years ago, the people of Nanzhao's moon worship tried to control Su Sengho with witchcraft. At that time, when Su Qin found out, he directly killed the person who released the witchcraft, and split a sword light to form a brand on another person so as to lock his position. Finally, he obediently led the way for Su Qin. Now that a few years have passed, the other party has returned to Nanzhao's moon worship early, and Su Qin should also go there. Since the moon worship dared to reach out to his family Su, they should be prepared to be exterminated. In the past few years, I have seen from many ancient books collected in the imperial palace that the moon god of the moon worship seems to be a bit strange. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. However, although Su Qin was curious in this regard, he was not too worried. The moon god of the moon worship is not simple, but it is impossible for him to reach the level of a legend. Otherwise, moon worship would have already shocked the world. Why would they stay in this small corner of Nanzhao? No matter what it is, I will know when I go and take a look. Thinking of this, Su Qin began to slowly refine the huge divine sense in the jade pendant again. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes, and a trace of inexplicable aura appeared and disappeared in an instant. In front of Su Qin, cracks began to appear on the surface of the crystal-clear jade pendant. After these cracks appeared, they quickly spread and split, covering the entire jade pendant in the blink of an eye. Then, crack. The jade pendant suddenly turned into powder. This jade pendant originally existed to carry the huge divine sense of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang. Now that the divine sense has disappeared, the jade pendant will naturally disappear. It's about time. Su Qin got up and walked out of the Right Spring Square. Su Qin did not intend to tell anyone about his trip to Nanzhao. With his speed, it would take at most a year to travel from Nanzhao to Chang'an, or even half a day if everything went well. There was no need to tell anyone about such a short time. However, before leaving, Su Qin returned to the family Su and separated a few strands of divine sense to attach to the family Su. When Su Qin was in Chang'an, his divine sense enveloped the entire city at all times, so the family Su was absolutely safe. But now Su Qin was leaving Chang'an and then going to Nanzhao. Even if the time was short, it was impossible not to make any preparations. With Su Qin's current strength, even if it was just a strand of divine sense, it was enough to suppress the world. Even if a martial arts legend were to attack, it would be able to delay for a while, enough for him to rush back. As for the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng and Su Yueyun, Su Qin also separated a strand of divine sense to them. Although Su Yueyun had the jade pendant that Su Qin gave her, it also contained a strand of divine sense. But after all, the divine sense in that jade pendant was divided by Su Qin before he entered the martial arts legend realm. It was far less useful than the current divine sense. I'll leave a sign in opportunity. Maybe I can use it at moon worship. Su Qin chose to leave the sign in opportunity of that day. If he could sign in at moon worship, Su Qin would sign in at moon worship. If not, Su Qin could still rush back to the palace before tomorrow. Time passed. Just before dawn, Su Qin walked out of the palace. Chapter 129. Nanzhao was located in the southwest of the Tang dynasty and was tens of thousands of miles away from Chang'an City. For ordinary people, it may take 10 years or even decades to cover such a long distance or even a lifetime. But in Su Qin's eyes, it was only a matter of hours. And this was under the premise that Su Qin was traveling slowly. Otherwise, if he went all out with the speed of Venerable Arhat, it would take him at most 2 hours. Although Nanzhao was one of the countries, it was far inferior to the Empire of Tang in terms of national strength. Moreover, most of the areas in the territory were undeveloped, and the atmosphere was desolate and the people were tough. In Nanzhao, moon worship was supreme. Even the emperor of Nanzhao was a disciple of moon worship and performed the etiquette of a father to the moon worshippers. At the same time, outside the 100,000 mountains of Nanzhao, Su Qin stood there quietly, looking into the depths of the 100,000 mountains. There it is. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he silently thought in his heart. According to the location he had locked onto, the sword light mark he planted stopped in the depths of the 100,000 mountains. Thinking of this, Su Qin took a step and disappeared. When he reached the depths of the 100,000 mountains and was more than 20 miles away from the mark he had locked onto, Su Qin slowed down and walked step by step. The reason why Su Qin did this was that he wanted to confirm if there was a place nearby that matched the system's sign-in, and also to check the various auras of the 100,000 mountains with the eye of truth. Although Su Qin didn't think that moon worship was a threat to him, it was always better to be cautious. Just as Su Qin walked along the mountain road unhurriedly, on another mountain road not far away, 5 or 6 figures suddenly walked out. Of these 5 to 6 figures, other than the leader who was a middle-aged man, the rest were all teenagers. At this moment, these young men and women were looking around curiously. Su Qin was not surprised. He had already noticed the presence of this group of people, but the other party did not think so, especially the middle-aged man. When he saw Su Qin, his expression changed slightly. "Are you also going to moon worship?" The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before asking cautiously. "Yes," Su Qin said casually as he walked. Other than the middle-aged man who had some inner strength and could barely be considered a martial artist, the rest of the young men and women were just ordinary people. "That's good. We're on the way." The middle-aged man heaved a sigh of relief and said in a friendly manner, "I'm a warrior from the nearby Qingyang town. These are the disciples that our town sent to moon worship this year." The middle-aged man blurted out everything he knew without hesitation. The middle-aged man's name was Hong Fei, and he was from Qingyang town outside the 100,000 mountains. According to him, the reason he entered the 100,000 mountains this time was to send disciples to moon worship. Moon worship was the national religion of Nanzhao, and its status was even higher than that of the king. Therefore, every year, a large number of Nanzhao citizens would send their children to moon worship. Once selected by moon worship and entered the saint sect, they would definitely soar to the sky. This was the purpose of the middle-aged man this time. He brought all the eligible young men and women in his town and sent them to moon worship. As long as one of them was selected, the impact on Qingyang town would be unprecedented. "You must be a martial artist who wants to visit the saint sect, right?" The middle-aged man Hong Fei glanced at Su Qin and asked tentatively. Su Qin's aura was restrained, and there was no difference between him and an ordinary person. But if he was an ordinary person, how would he dare to come to the 100,000 mountains? Therefore, in the eyes of the middle-aged man Hong Fei, Su Qin must be a powerful martial artist. In fact, it was not rare for martial artists like Su Qin to appear in the 100,000 mountains. There were many of them every year, and their purpose was to visit the saint sect. Su Qin heard him and did not bother to answer. Seeing this, the middle-aged man Hong Fei became more and more convinced of his judgment. Su Qin must have a request for moon worship, so he came to the 100,000 mountains specifically to visit the saint sect. However, Su Qin did not speak and the middle-aged man Hong Fei did not dare to continue talking. He led the young men and women behind him and followed Su Qin. "Let me tell you, when you enter the saint sect later, don't look around. If you disturb any of the saints, it will be a disaster for our Qingyang town," the middle-aged man warned the young men and women. "Uncle Hong, is moon worship that good?" At this moment, a young man with a strong head could not help but ask. "It's more than good." The middle-aged man Hong Fei shook his head and said, "A few years ago, a disciple of moon worship wanted to go to the capital. In the end, before the disciple arrived, the king and many ministers were already waiting outside the capital to welcome him. Tell me, is it good or not?" When the middle-aged man Hong Fei said this, the young man who asked the question immediately shrunk his head and did not dare to say another word. The other young men and women were also shocked. For them, the highest status person they had ever seen was the mayor of the town. As for the king of Nanzhao, he was a legendary figure. But now, it seemed that the so-called king of Nanzhao was nothing in front of the Saint sect. Then what should we do? A beautiful young woman asked timidly. Do whatever the Saint sect asks you to do. The middle-aged man Hong Fei said seriously, remember, don't have any ulterior motives. Got it. I'll remember it too. The young men and women quickly agreed. Consider yourself lucky. The middle-aged man Hong Fei suddenly thought of something and smiled. Recently the Saint sect has been worshipping the moon god, so the requirements for disciples have been relaxed. Otherwise you won't even be able to enter the Saint sect, let alone become a disciple. When the middle-aged man Hong Fei said this, his face was full of emotions. Worshipping the moon god? Su Qin, who was walking at a steady pace in front, was slightly moved. Before he came, he had read from the ancient books that moon worship would worship the moon god once every 10 years. Worshipping the moon god is the most solemn day of moon worship. On this day all disciples will return to the Saint sect. It's a good time to settle it once and for all, so that there won't be any revenge in the future. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. 4 hours later, after a long mountain road, Su Qin finally arrived outside the moon worship. At this time, Su Qin was at the top of a mountain, and in front of him was an iron chain that spanned across 2 mountains. As for the moon worship, it was located on the other side of the iron chain, a full 10 miles away. We're here. That's the moon worship. The middle-aged man Hong Fei let out a sigh of relief and pointed to the other side of the iron chain. What a spectacular sight. The young men and women opened their eyes wide and muttered to themselves. Chapter 130. At this point, many boys and girls on the field could only vaguely see the towering moon worship temple standing on the top of the mountain 10 miles away. But even so, a majestic and desolate aura continued to rise, as if illuminating the 100,000 mountains. The middle-aged man Hong Fei was full of awe. He glanced at the boys and girls and whispered, "We just need to wait here now. Remember, don't take a step forward." The middle-aged man Hong Fei warned with a serious expression. Yes. Several boys and girls subconsciously took a few steps back. Moon worship really knows how to choose a place. Su Qin's eyes were calm as he looked at moon worship. Moon worship was surrounded by cliffs on all sides. As long as they guard the only way, even if they are besieged by millions of troops, they will be safe. As for the martial artists, unless it is a group of upper realm martial artists who rush to the moon worship temple regardless of life and death, no matter how many ordinary martial artists there are, it will be useless. Because they can't touch moon worship at all. Su Qin thought as he opened Eyes of Truth. Suddenly, in the moon worship 10 miles away, auras appeared one after another. These auras were strong or weak, similar to martial artists, but they also revealed other strange auras. The disciples of moon worship are not martial artists. They cultivate witchcraft and curses, using voodoo insects as the foundation to kill people invisibly. Su Qin looked at the auras in moon worship and thought silently. However, in the entire moon worship, only 2 auras have reached grade 1. It's nothing to worry about. Su Qin observed for a moment and had a general understanding of moon worship. But why don't I notice the aura of moon god? Su Qin frowned slightly. He looked at the entire moon worship with eyes of truth, but he didn't find the so-called moon god at all. In order to be foolproof, Su Qin continued to observe with eyes of truth, for a while until he confirmed all the trump cards of moon worship. He shook his head slightly. Forget it. There's no need to waste time. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he took a step forward. Hong Fei, the middle-aged man not far away, was shocked when he saw this scene. He immediately dissuaded, "Your Excellency, this is the Holy Moon Church. Our every move is under the watch of the Holy Moon Church. Please be cautious." The middle-aged man Hong Fei thought that Su Qin was impatient and wanted to follow the chain to the moon worship center. This behavior seemed normal, but in fact, it was a provocation to moon worship. The middle-aged man Hong Fei knew the rules of moon worship very well. No matter who it was, even if it was a king, they had to wait patiently. However, anyone who violated this rule would be hunted down by the entire moon worship. With the influence of the moon worship in Nanzhao, coupled with the strange and unpredictable witchcraft curses, anyone who was hunted down by them would die. However, the next moment, under the incredulous gaze of the middle-aged man Hong Fei, Su Qin stretched out his right hand, slowly raised it, and pressed it toward the moon worship center from 10 miles away. In an instant, the wind on the top of the mountain seemed to stop, and a dark golden Buddha palm covered the world. Moon worship. In a majestic and tall temple. The moon worshippers and the elders sat cross-legged, looking silent as if they were troubled by something. A few years ago, our saintess fell in Chang, and of the empire of Tang. At this time, the moon worshippers suddenly stood up, looked down at the elders and said in a deep voice. As soon as these words came out, the hearts of all the elders present trembled. A few years ago, the moon worship deliberately sent the saintess to Chang, and in order to set up a trap in the empire of Tang. They wanted to plant a nail in the Li royal family. However, everyone, including the moon worshippers, didn't expect that the saintess not only failed to complete the mission of the saint sect, but also died in Chang'an City. Moreover, according to the white-haired old woman who came back from Chang'an City alive, the saintess died in a sword light that came from the sky. Not only did the saintess die, but even the most ancient venomous insect in the entire moon worship was also cut into nothingness. When this news reached the ears of the elders and the sect leader, everyone felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Although they didn't know who had cut the sword light, they knew very well that the other party was not someone that the moon worship could deal with. Even in the following years, the moon worship was trembling in fear, fearing that one day the other party would come to their door. Sect leader, why did you mention this? An elder couldn't help but ask. The other elders heard this and also looked at the moon worshippers. The saintess did fall in Chang'an City, but so what? According to what the white-haired old woman said at that time, the person who did it was at least a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. It was far from what the moon worship could deal with. The vitality of a peak grade 1 great grandmaster is enough to ignore all witchcraft curses. What I want to say is, the moon worshippers paused and continued, the saint sect is about to take revenge with their own hands. What? Many of the elders were puzzled and puzzled. Revenge? How can the saint sect take revenge? The other party didn't even show their face and cut the most ancient venomous insect of the saint sect into nothingness. How can they take revenge? Just as the elders were in a state of shock and uncertainty, the moon worshippers said slowly, I have learned the will of the moon god. After this sacrifice, the moon god will manifest in the world. When these words came out, the faces of all the elders changed. The moon god will manifest in the world. This. Sect master, is what you said true? The voice of an elder trembled as he looked at the moon worshippers with great excitement. Of course. The moon worshippers nodded slightly, and their tone was also full of fanaticism. In the eyes of all the moon worship disciples, the moon god is invincible. As long as the moon god takes action, no one in the world can stop their moon worship. With the protection of the moon god, why would the saint sect hide in Nanzhao? Yes, no matter who killed the saintess, just wait for death obediently. Sect master, it is better for the saint sect to start gathering disciples now. When the moon god manifests in the world, we will kill our way to Chang'an City and avenge the saintess. Many elders began to clamor. When the moon worshippers heard this, they waved their hands and said, it is only a matter of time before we kill our enemies. Soon the saint sect will rule the world. Every word of the moon worshippers was filled with strong confidence. Just as the elders and the sect master were discussing how to torture the person who killed the saintess, suddenly there was a commotion outside. What's going on? The moon worshippers frowned. The other elders also looked dissatisfied. They were just looking forward to the future, but they were interrupted. Let's go out and take a look. The moon worshippers faintly felt that something was wrong. They directly got up and walked out of the hall. The elders looked at each other and could only follow behind the sect master. However, when the moon worshippers walked out of the holy temple, they found that all the disciples were looking at the sky with incomparable horror. The moon worshippers and the elders suppressed the doubts in their hearts and raised their heads to look at the sky. The next moment, the moon worshippers saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. They saw a glass Buddha palm that spanned across the void, blooming with endless pure light, exuding a posture that encompassed heaven and earth. The glass Buddha palm became bigger and bigger as if it came from above the 9 heavens. A sacred, solemn, pure, and heavy aura instantly suppressed down. At this moment, the sky darkened. Chapter 131. Outside the Holy Sanctum. The moon worshippers and the elders trembled as they stared in disbelief at the Buddha's palm that was slowly falling from the sky. What is that? The moon worshippers were shocked as they felt a terrifying pressure suddenly descending. Under this pressure, all the disciples in the holy sanctum couldn't help but kneel down, not daring to look directly at the Buddha's palm that was shrouding heaven and earth. Even the elders of the holy sanctum were forced to bend their backs. Only the moon worshippers and the other holy emissary were barely holding on. But it was obvious that with the continuous pressure of the dark golden Buddha's palm, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. In the blink of an eye, the moon worshippers finally broke free from the shock. They realized that if they continued like this, they would be crushed by the Buddha's palm in a few seconds at most. Run? The moon worshippers' eyes were red as they frantically burned their blood essence. Even the life-venomous worm in their body was alarmed as it let out a sharp cry. Screech! A pale golden shadow of a venomous worm appeared behind the moon worshippers. Suddenly, the moon worshippers' aura began to soar as if there was no end to it. Crack! The moon worshippers stepped on the ground fiercely as their bodies turned into phantoms and leaped out of the holy sanctum. In addition to the moon worshippers, the other holy emissary also did the same. He desperately broke free from the pressure of the Buddha's palm and fled in the opposite direction of the moon worshippers. Whether it was the moon worshippers or the holy emissary, they didn't even think about the elders and other disciples of the holy sanctum. Because they knew very well in their hearts that under this glazed Buddha palm, the holy moon church was finished, completely and utterly finished. Want to run? Su Qin, who was 10 miles away, saw this scene and shook his head slightly. He didn't care at all. His palm wasn't the real Buddha's palm. It was just a simulation of the concept. But even so, it wasn't something that any ninth-grade martial artist could resist. As expected, the moon worshippers and the other saint who had escaped suddenly realized that under the suppression of the glazed Buddha palm, even though they had broken free and regained their mobility, their speed was as slow as a tortoise's. According to their current speed, it would take them several days to escape from the moon worship. And in just a few days. Not to mention a few days, even if it was just a few seconds, moon worship would be crushed several times by the glazed Buddha palm. No. Under the despairing gazes of the moon worshippers, the saint and countless other disciples, the dark golden glazed Buddha palm came crashing down. At this moment, everything shattered. The entire moon worship temple collapsed and turned into dust, completely disappearing from the world. If someone were to look from a distance, they would find that a section of the mountain where the holy moon church was located had been cut off, and on the mirror-like surface of the mountain, there was a faint imprint of a Buddha's palm that could penetrate heaven and earth. From beginning to end. From the leader of the moon worship sect to the many disciples, no one knew what had happened. It's over? Su Qin's eyes were calm and his thoughts were unruffled. Although the moon worship sect had a supreme status in Nanzhao, in fact, its actions were no different from those of the demon sect. Wantonly killing, using living beings as sacrifices to the moon god, these were as simple as drinking water and eating in the eyes of the moon worship sect. The Buddha's palm is powerful, but for me now, if I want to really use it, I'm afraid I'll need to use at least 60% of my true essence and divine will. Su Qin roughly estimated in his mind. His palm just now was just a simulation of the real Buddha's palm, but Su Qin also had a rough idea of how much energy he would need to use the Buddha's palm. At this moment, the middle-aged man Hong Fei, who was about to persuade Su Qin, stood there dumbfounded. The boys and girls next to him were also dumbfounded, their faces full of disbelief. They looked at Su Qin and the moon worship sect that had been completely reduced to dust with terrified eyes. The saint sect. The saint sect is gone. The middle-aged man Hong Fei's teeth were chattering, and he almost thought he was dreaming. The moon worship sect had dominated Nanzhao for hundreds of thousands of years. Even the lords of Nanzhao treated the disciples of the saint sect with respect. To some extent, moon worship sect could replace Nanzhao with just a thought. The middle-aged man Hong Fei would never have dreamed that the supreme moon worship sect in his eyes would one day be destroyed by a palm. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man Hong Fei stiffened. He looked at the figure not far away and stood there respectfully, not daring to have any thoughts. Because he knew in his heart that even a giant like the moon worship sect was like an ant in the hands of Su Qin, let alone them. You can go. Su Qin glanced at the middle-aged man Hong Fei and said casually. The middle-aged man Hong Fei was not a member of the moon worship sect. As for the boys and girls beside him, they did not have the time to join the saint sect. Although Su Qin can destroy the holy moon church with a raise of his hand without frowning, he will not kill innocent people. Su Qin destroyed the moon worship sect because the moon worship sect provoked him first. Yes, we will go now. When the middle-aged man Hong Fei heard Su Qin's words, it was as if he had been granted amnesty. He immediately took the young boys and girls next to him and respectfully retreated. When they were some distance away from Su Qin, they fled without looking back. The middle-aged man suddenly had a thought in his mind. The moon worship sect has suppressed Nanzhao for hundreds of thousands of years. Now that it has been destroyed, the impact on Nanzhao is far-reaching. After the middle-aged man Hong Fei and the others left, Su Qin took another look at the mountain where the moon worship sect was originally located, and was ready to return to the empire of Tang. However, just then, Su Qin's expression changed slightly, and he released a huge amount of divine sense in an instant. Interesting. There was an inexplicable look on Su Qin's face, and he took a step forward and disappeared. When Su Qin reappeared, he was already standing on the mountain where the moon worship sect was originally located. Before the moon worship sect was destroyed, this position was a certain position deep in the holy temple. At this moment, not far from Su Qin, a jade statue about the height of a person stood there quietly. The jade statue is a woman. Her face is hazy and cannot be seen clearly. One can only vaguely recognize that there is a faint full moon mark on the jade statue's eyebrows. If it was an ordinary person, even a grade 1 great grandmaster, seeing this jade statue, although they would be surprised why the jade statue was so lifelike, they would not think much about it. After all, no matter how lifelike a jade statue is, it is just a jade statue. It has no life. At most, its value is a little higher, but for a martial artist, it is nothing at all. However, Su Qin took a closer look at the jade statue. After a while, a smile appeared on his face and he said, "You don't want to come out now, do you want me to do it?" Chapter 132. Why don't you come out now? Are you waiting for me to make a move? Su Qin's voice rang out. At this time, there was no one around him, as if he was talking to the air. However, a moment later, the jade statue not far from Su Qin suddenly emitted a faint light, and then an illusory figure appeared. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." The illusory figure wore a palace dress and looked pure, but there was an indescribable charm in every part of her. White skin, graceful figure. Are you the moon god worshipped by the moon-worshipping cult? Su Qin looked at the illusory figure with interest. In Su Qin's eyes, the illusory figure in the palace dress was just a strand of divine sense of a certain martial arts legend, but it was different from the divine sense left in the jade pendant by the founder of the Empire of Tang. The other party was not without a master, but had her own consciousness. "Moon god, you flatter me," the figure in the palace dress sighed and said, "I just want to live. The world is unfair. Even if you become a martial arts legend, you can only live for 500 years, Shoyuan. Once 500 years have passed, no matter how strong you are, you will disappear." At this point, the figure in the palace dress paused for a while and continued, "There is a way to live forever overseas, but it can only extend one's life by 100 or 200 years at most. If you want to live forever, you have to transcend the 9 heavens legends and become an earth immortal. Have you been overseas?" Su Qin looked at the figure in the palace dress and suddenly became interested. Originally, Su Qin planned to directly destroy the illusory figure and then return to the Emperor of Tang Palace as soon as possible. But seeing that the figure in the palace dress seemed to know something about overseas, he was not in a hurry for the time being. Anyway, the figure in the palace dress was right in front of him. With Su Qin's ability, even if she recovered to her peak, she might not be his opponent, let alone now when she was only left with a strand of divine sense. Since Su Qin attained the Arhat fruit, he had heard of overseas more than once, but he had not seen much specific information. It was as if to all martial arts legends or venerable Arhat, overseas was a taboo that they could not talk about. 300 years ago, I once crossed the sea. In the depths of the endless sea, the heaven and earth Yuan Qi was abundant. Compared to this continent, that place was like another world. As the beautiful figure in the palace dress spoke, she seemed to have fallen into some kind of memory. Unfortunately, even with the favorable environment in the depths of the endless ocean, the last land immortal that appeared was 1,000 years ago. Land immortal. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. Earth immortal was the realm after martial arts legend. It was said that Earth immortals had a lifespan of more than 1,000 years. They were indeed no different from real immortals. Do you mean that even overseas there are no land immortals? Su Qin asked. At least that's what I understand. The beautiful figure in the palace dress shook her head and said, "There are many experts in the sea, but no one knows about the immortals of the land. There aren't even any rumors about it." The beautiful figure in the palace dress sighed. I even began to doubt whether the so-called Land Immortal realm really exists. The last Land Immortal that appeared 1,000 years ago was probably just a rumor. The beautiful figure in the palace dress tone was filled with despair. Any martial artist who stepped into the martial arts legend realm was one in a billion. Since they were young, they had overcome all obstacles and swept the world, invincible for an era. But in the end, they were forcefully trapped in the martial arts legend realm, unable to move forward and facing death alone. One could imagine the torment. I see. Su Qin was deep in thought. Although he had never been overseas, he guessed that what the beautiful figure in the palace dress said should be true. No matter how abundant the heaven and earth yuan qi was overseas, and no matter how many treasures there were, how could it compare to Su Qin? Not to mention other things, just the primordial spirit liquid and blood bodhi alone were probably scarce overseas. But Su Qin could eat them like candy every day. In addition to these two treasures, there were also a lot of other cultivation resources. But even so, Su Qin was still stuck in the fourth heavenly layer for several years, let alone the overseas martial arts legends. Therefore, if there were martial artists overseas who surpassed Su Qin, such as fifth heavenly layer or sixth heavenly layer legends, Su Qin would believe it. After all, those who were close to the end of the Shoyuan and had lived for almost 500 years could indeed reach this realm. But if there were land immortals who were completely above the martial arts legends, Su Qin would not believe it. Martial arts legends had a total of 500 years of Shoyuan, so how could they enter the land immortal realm? Of course, Su Qin was an exception. Although Su Qin was not a land immortal, he had the same Shoyuan as the land immortals and could live for 1,000 years. Fellow Taoist. Just as Su Qin was thinking, the beautiful figure in the palace dress suddenly looked at Su Qin with a soft and pitiful gaze. I have lost my physical body, and only a strand of my divine sense is left. I am alone and have no one to rely on, so I hope fellow Taoists can take me in. The beautiful figure in the palace dress voice was soft, and a trace of an extremely charming aura began to spread. Don't worry, although I am useless, I was once a martial arts legend, so I still know some things about martial arts cultivation. Moreover, before I fell, I hid the treasures I obtained in a certain place. As long as fellow Taoist agrees, I will give you all my treasures. The beautiful figure in the palace dress words were full of fatal temptation. No matter what, the beautiful figure in the palace dress was still a martial arts legend. Her understanding of martial arts cultivation was a priceless treasure for any martial arts 9th grade martial artist, and it could save them a lot of detours. Even in the eyes of martial arts legends of the same level, it was a great reference. As for the treasures of a lifetime, it was even more amazing. What did it mean to have the treasures of a martial arts legend? Is there such a good thing? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face as he looked at the beautiful figure in the palace dress. Of course, the beautiful figure in the palace dress was already within 5 meters of Su Qin without him noticing. As long as fellow Taoist, as the beautiful figure in the palace dress said this, her illusory figure suddenly blurred, and instantly turned into a stream of light, and rushed into Su Qin's forehead. Ah! You fell for my trick, didn't you? The beautiful figure in the palace dress voice rang in Su Qin's ears, and there was a hint of pride in it. From beginning to end, the beautiful figure in the palace dress had never thought of asking Su Qin to take her in. Instead, she was prepared to take over Su Qin's body. If Su Qin had remained vigilant and not let the beautiful figure in the palace dress get within 5 meters of him, no matter how capable the beautiful figure in the palace dress was, she would not have been able to do anything to Su Qin. However, the beautiful figure in the palace dress first used the information she knew about overseas as bait, and pretended to be harmless to lower Su Qin's vigilance. Finally, she lured him with treasures and successfully got within 5 meters of Su Qin. At this point, the beautiful figure in the palace dress plan was already more than half complete. Although I've been sleeping for hundreds of years, I've been using offerings to nourish my divine sense. Coupled with the fortuitous encounter overseas, my divine sense is stable and indestructible. I can't possibly possess a martial artist who has just entered the myth realm. The beautiful figure in the palace dress thoughts spun rapidly, and she was full of confidence. In her opinion, Su Qin had not even been overseas, and should have just entered the martial arts legend realm. At most, he was hovering around the second heaven, and could not possibly resist the invasion of her divine sense. Once I successfully occupy this body and have the power to protect myself, I'll be able to act freely in some matters. When the beautiful figure in the palace dress thought of this, a hint of excitement rose in her heart. Although after occupying Su Qin's body she would have to change from a woman to a man, but as long as she could survive, What was the price to pay? Buzz. The beautiful figure in the palace dress divine sense quickly surged into Su Qin's forehead, and then into his ancestral aperture. However, before the beautiful figure in the palace dress could make her next move, her eyes widened, and she looked at everything in front of her with incomparable shock. In the depths of the ancestral aperture, a giant golden Buddha stood quietly in the center of the world. It was infinitely huge and its fingers touched the sky and the earth. It filled her vision as if there was nothing more noble than it. The Buddha's light spread, illuminating the darkness and enveloping the void. Chapter 133. This is. The figure in the palace dress trembled as she looked in disbelief at the giant golden Buddha in the depths of her ancestral aperture. The Buddha's light spread. Crack. Crack. The figure in the palace dress felt her divine sense collapsing and dissipating. It was as if just looking at the giant golden Buddha was something she could never bear. Impossible? The figure in the palace dress felt as if her heart had fallen into an abyss. She had once traveled overseas and saw a fifth heaven divine realm martial artist from afar. At that time, that fifth heaven divine realm martial artist was no different from heaven and earth to the figure in the palace dress, but now, the figure in the palace dress subconsciously compared that fifth heaven divine realm martial artist to the giant golden Buddha in front of her, but found that the two were not on the same level at all. For this giant golden Buddha that filled heaven and earth, let alone a mere fifth heaven divine realm martial artist, even a true earth divine realm martial artist was like an ant. I never thought that I would one day fall in the hands of such a great existence. Just as the figure in the palace dress had this thought, under the illumination of the Buddha's light, the figure maintained by her divine sense completely collapsed and disappeared. Outside. Su Qin touched his eyebrows as a strange look flashed across his face. He did not expect the figure in the palace dress to be so courageous that she dared to barge into his ancestral aperture with her divine sense and face the giant golden Buddha that symbolized the inheritance of the strongest divine skill, the Buddha's palm. One must know that even Su Qin was under great pressure when facing this giant golden Buddha. And this was under the premise that the giant golden Buddha recognized Su Qin as its master and would not harm Su Qin. As for the figure in the palace dress, if the figure in the palace dress turned around and ran, Su Qin might have to spend a moment to suppress her. But she barged into his ancestral aperture. It could only be said that she did not want to live anymore. On this trip, I've learned some news about the overseas world. Su Qin's mind entered the ancestral aperture between his eyebrows. He glanced at the golden Buddha that still seemed indestructible and eternal as he thought silently. After confirming that there was no earth immortal powerhouse, Su Qin felt much more relaxed. To the overseas martial arts legends, becoming a terrestrial immortal was far out of their reach. In fact, it was basically a legend. However, in Su Qin's eyes, as long as they followed the prescribed order, it would take at most a few hundred years to achieve it. Compared to Su Qin's 1,000 years of Shouyuan's life, a few hundred years was not unacceptable. It was completely affordable. Right. I haven't signed in here yet. Su Qin calmed himself down and suddenly thought. When he left Chang, and this time, he deliberately left a sign-in opportunity. He wanted to see if he could find a new sign-in location on the way. Unfortunately, Su Qin walked all the way, especially after entering the 100,000 mountains. He slowed down almost to the extreme, but he still didn't find any other checkpoints. And now this was the only place that Su Qin hadn't signed in yet. If this place still didn't meet the conditions for signing in, Su Qin could only rush back to the palace to sign in. System sign in. Su Qin paused for a moment and said in his heart. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. Obtained Moon Forging Divine Technique. Moon Forging Divine Technique? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. In the next moment, everything about the Moon Forging Divine Technique poured into Su Qin's mind. It turned out to be a secret technique to stabilize divine sense. Su Qin opened his eyes, a thoughtful look on his face. When he saw the beautiful figure in the palace dress just now, he was wondering why her divine sense was so stable. Now it seems that it was because of this secret technique. Good stuff. Su Qin nodded slightly, joy appeared on his face. Although a peak grade 1 great grandmaster can condense divine sense, and when one reaches the realm of venerable arhat, their divine sense can condense into a substance and can easily kill people with divine sense, create illusions and so on. But even among venerable arhat, there are differences in divine sense. The stronger and more stable the divine sense, the more helpful it is for one's own cultivation. Some legends even completely give up on physical cultivation and focus on divine sense breakthroughs. But the moon-forging divine technique can stabilize Su Qin's divine sense to a great extent. In the future, when Su Qin encounters legends with extremely powerful divine sense, although he can't say that he can win against them in a competition of divine sense, at least he won't be suppressed by them. This is the advantage of having a stable divine sense. It's time to go. When I return to the Imperial Palace, I will cultivate this moon-forging divine technique. Su Qin took a step forward and disappeared, rushing towards the Chang and Imperial Palace. Shortly after Su Qin left, half a day later, someone discovered that the moon worship had disappeared. The news spread. The whole of Nanzhao was shaken. For hundreds of years, the moon worship has been in Nanzhao, and its status is higher than that of the previous rulers. How could such a behemoth disappear just like that? At first, no one believed it and thought it was nonsense. But as time passed, more and more people returned from the 100,000 mountains and repeated this matter, and everyone was stunned. Especially in the original position of the moon worship, there was a huge handprint, as if the entire moon worship had been erased by the owner of this handprint. Suddenly, Nanzhao fell into a panic. That was the moon worship. How could it be erased just like that? If it was said that the other martial arts sects in the world joined forces to fight the moon worship for several days and nights, and finally destroyed the moon worship, it would be barely acceptable. But what was the truth? The moon worship disappeared silently as if it had never appeared at all. Who on earth pressed that handprint? Who pressed it? I think it's a real immortal. I'm afraid only a real immortal can do this. Countless people in Nanzhao whispered, and their tone was full of awe. For them, the existence that could destroy the entire moon worship with a single palm was no different from an immortal, even if it wasn't. Nanzhao. Nanzhao Lord looked anxious and kept pacing back and forth. What should we do? What should we do? The sect leader has disappeared, the elders have disappeared, and everything of the saint has disappeared, Nanzhao Lord muttered to himself, and his face was full of fear. At this moment, one of the officials below suddenly stood up. Your Majesty, perhaps the disappearance of the Holy Church is not a bad thing for our Nanzhao. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of many ministers on the scene changed slightly. If the moon worship still existed, no minister would dare to have such thoughts. But now that the saint had disappeared, from the moon worshippers to the disciples of the saint, no one had survived, and some thoughts were naturally born. For hundreds of thousands of years, the status of the moon worship in Nanzhao was so high that it could easily interfere with the replacement of the Lord. And now, the moon worship had disappeared, which was equivalent to a shackle on Nanzhao's body had disappeared with it. Chapter 134. While Nanzhao was in a sensation, Su Qin had returned to the Emperor of Tang's palace. Su Qin naturally didn't know the impact of his destruction of moon worship on Nanzhao. Or even if Su Qin knew, he wouldn't think too much about it. Nanzhao is located in the southwest. It is a small country. There is not even a grade 1 great grandmaster in the whole country. Even if the restriction of moon worship is gone, what can they do? After Su Qin returned to the imperial palace, he returned to his usual life. From the time Su Qin left, it had only been half a day. No one in the entire imperial palace thought that in this short period of time, Su Qin would travel tens of thousands of li, destroy the Holy Moon Church in Nanzhao, and then slowly return. At night, Su Qin sat cross-legged. Bits and pieces of information about the moon-forging divine technique flowed in his mind. Moon-forging divine technique is a divine sense secret technique that can stabilize Su Qin's divine sense to a great extent. Okay, let's start. Su Qin closed his eyes, and a huge amount of divine sense began to brew in his body, constantly dispersing and reorganizing according to the method of moon-forging divine technique. If it was someone else, even a legend like Venerable Arhat, it would take a lot of time to fully comprehend this moon-forging divine technique, and even those with poor comprehension would not be able to get started at all. After all, moon-forging divine technique involves the forging of divine sense. If one is not sure that they have fully comprehended it, who would dare to mess around with their own divine sense? But Su Qin is different. After the system's infusion, his mastery of this divine sense secret technique has probably reached the level of the founder. Although it is his first time practicing it, he is very familiar with it. 1. Under Su Qin's control, his huge divine sense suddenly spread out, turning into extremely small thoughts, and then these thoughts were recombined to construct a more stable divine sense. Under normal circumstances, Venerable Arhat's or martial arts legends' divine sense would be scattered, but the moon-forging divine sense could reassemble the scattered divine sense and unleash a power that far exceeded the original divine sense. It was just like charcoal and diamonds. They were obviously made of the same material, but because of the different structural combination, they showed two completely different forms. It was the same for divine will. However, compared to external substances, divine sense was much finer. The slightest carelessness could damage the foundation of divine sense, causing great hidden dangers. Even Su Qin wouldn't have dared to split his divine will like this without the moon-forging art. As his divine sense continued to reorganize, Su Qin felt that his mind was becoming clearer and clearer, and his thoughts were becoming more agile. It's about time. According to the description of the moon-forging divine art, I should have already mastered it. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and carefully sensed his surroundings. A look of surprise appeared on his face. Although my divine consciousness is much weaker now, its quality is much better than before. Su Qin was overjoyed. Moreover, the stability of my divine sense has also improved my cultivation speed a lot. Su Qin slightly nodded, his thoughts fluctuating. If a grade 1 great grandmaster wants to go further, he needs to transform his body, internal strength, and divine sense. Venerable Arhat and legends also pay attention to the body, true essence, and divine sense. Whether it is the Venerable Arhat who just entered the first heavenly layer or the Venerable Arhat who cultivated to the limit, the body, true essence, and divine sense are the three cornerstones of oneself, the most fundamental things. A strong body can nurture more divine sense. Similarly, a strong divine sense can counterattack the body and speed up the cultivation speed. At this moment, Su Qin was in a similar state. Next, I have to work hard and strive to reach the great Arhat realm as soon as possible. Su Qin calmed down and thought silently in his heart. The great Arhat realm is the realm after Venerable Arhat and is equivalent to the Earth Immortal. Of course, whether it is the great Arhat realm or the Earth Immortal realm, they are essentially different names for martial artists of the same level. In fact, the essence of the power controlled by the two is the same, similar to Venerable Arhat and legends. Next, Su Qin once again devoted himself to cultivation. Every day except for cultivation and signing in, he hardly paid attention to anything else. The Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, occasionally brought his children to chat with Su Qin, letting Li Yuan and Li Wan get closer to Su Qin. Compared to other imperial family heirs, the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, was more willing to let his children get closer to Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, has been on the throne for so many years and is used to people's cunning, but he still can't see any scheming in Su Qin. Only in front of Su Qin does the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, feel that he is not the emperor, but the poor scholar who had nothing. And since the last time Su Qin reminded the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, that the premise of removing the vassals is that he has enough confidence, the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, has never mentioned the matter of removing the vassals in front of his subjects. Su Qin knew in his heart that the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, was enduring. Enduring is not cowardice, nor is it admitting defeat, but for the future of the Empire of Tang. Li Si, who has lived 2 lives, naturally knows that the most effective way to remove the vassals is to implement the order of pushing grace. As long as the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, issued a decree to allow the vassals to divide their territories equally among their children. In this way, the territories of the vassals will be smaller and smaller. Although the overall situation will not change, it will fall into the hands of different people, and the power will be scattered, which will weaken the power of the vassals without bloodshed. However, the implementation of the order of pushing grace is based on the premise that the vassals are obedient. In other words, you have to let the vassals do what the order of pushing grace says. But now the problem the Empire of Tang is that the vassals are simply ignoring the imperial power. Let alone the order of pushing grace, even if the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, issued any decree, when it comes to the vassals' territories, it is as if there is no decree. Besides, the vassals are not fools. Every vassal has countless strategists under their command, and they can certainly guess the effect of the order of pushing grace on the vassals. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, 3 years have passed. During these 3 years, although the Empire of Tang is still restricted by the vassals in various places, on the whole, it shows a trend of prosperity. The Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, is bold and decisive, developing business, increasing taxes, and the silver in the treasury is enough. In addition, under the coaxing and pestering of Princess Li Wan, the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, finally agreed to let her practice martial arts. In fact, the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, does not want to see Li Wan step into martial arts. In the view of the Emperor of Tang, Li Xing, every martial artist has not been polishing their body for decades, and their life is plain. Li Wan, as a princess, does not need to suffer this at all. On this day, in the right spring square, Su Qin is sitting cross-legged, and his breath is flowing endlessly, slowly but steadily rising. Suddenly, Su Qin's breath suddenly stopped, and the rising speed suddenly slowed down, and then calmed down after a while. And at this time, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and a smile appeared on his face. Finally, it is complete. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated and his face showed joy. Chapter 135. Inside the right spring square. Su Qin slowly retracted his aura. Compared to my previous estimate of reaching the peak of the fourth heavenly layer, it's at least 1 to 2 years earlier. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. One must know that with Su Qin's current eyesight, even if his estimate was wrong, it would at most be half a month to a month, but now it was a full year to 2 years earlier. It should be the moon-forging divine art that stabilized my divine sense and improved my cultivation speed. Su Qin speculated in his heart. Although he knew that stabilizing his divine sense was beneficial to his martial Dao cultivation when he practiced the moon-forging divine art, he didn't expect the improvement to be so great. That trip to Nanzhao was worth it, Ruan Tuan said. Su Qin nodded slightly, quite satisfied. Through the trip to Nanzhao, not only did he obtain this divine sense secret technique, but he also learned the specific level of the overseas martial artists. Since I've reached the peak, I should prepare to break through to the 5th heavenly layer. Su Qin slowly got up, walked out of the right spring square, and walked slowly along the shaded path. The East Palace was still as deserted as ever, but Su Qin had long been used to it and even enjoyed it. For Su Qin, the power, beauty and wealth of the secular world were all ephemeral, only his own strength was fundamental. It was the same in the Shaolin Temple, and it was the same in the palace of the Emperor of Tang. Otherwise, with Su Qin's ability, even if he wanted to sit on the dragon throne, it would be a matter of a thought. Who in the Empire of Tang could stop him? But the Emperor was not someone who could be just because he wanted to. Throughout the 500 years of the Empire of Tang, except for the founding ancestor, almost all the emperors had no achievements in martial Dao. Even the founding ancestor only established the Empire of Tang after stepping into the realm of martial arts legend. Not only the Empire of Tang, but the emperors of all the countries in the world were similar. Why is this? A person's energy is limited. If one wants to achieve great achievements in martial Dao, they must invest a lot of energy, but the emperor couldn't do it. This was obviously in conflict with what Su Qin wanted. Su Qin walked in the East Palace unhurriedly, his thoughts empty. In the past 3 years, in addition to cultivation, Su Qin also signed in countless treasures. Although most places in the palace of the Emperor of Tang could only be signed once, there were still more than a dozen places where Su Qin could repeatedly fleece. For example, in front of the altar of the crop altar. In front of the Taiji Palace, he signed in and obtained the celestial being aura gazing technique. In front of Bright Jade Square, he signed in and used the 18 dragon subduing palms. Among them, the vermilion fruit was the most helpful to Su Qin. In terms of medicinal efficacy, the vermilion fruit was at least dozens of times better than the blood bodhi. Even Su Qin needed a week to barely digest one vermilion fruit. One had to know that ever since Su Qin's body underwent the 4th transformation and entered the Arhat realm, even if he absorbed the 9 revolutions whirling pill and glazed golden core, it only took a moment. But the vermilion fruit took a week, so one could imagine how terrifying its medicinal efficacy was. Unfortunately, I only signed in a few hundred vermilion fruits in 3 years. Su Qin shook his head slightly, feeling a little regretful. Originally, after signing in thousands of blood bodhi and thousands of drops of innate spirit liquid, he was prepared to use the sign-in opportunity on other things. But ever since he signed in the vermilion fruit, Su Qin's interest in the crop altar was reignited. There was also the secret technique, the celestial divination technique, which also made Su Qin very happy. The celestial divination technique can observe the qi of the world, similar to Su Qin's eye of truth. The difference is that the celestial divination technique is not a divine ability. Su Qin also discovered that if he combined the celestial divination technique with the eye of truth, he might be able to see half of the Empire of Tang at a glance. As for the 18 dragon subduing palms, it is an offensive internal divine art. With Su Qin's current strength, once he uses it, he might be able to summon 108 golden true dragons, sweeping through everything. Overall, the 18 dragon subduing palms is an average divine art. Among the countless divine arts and secret techniques that Su Qin has mastered, it can probably squeeze into the top 500. In addition to the above 3 items, Su Qin also received a large number of other treasures from signing in. There were cultivation techniques, secret techniques, medicinal pills and spirit fruits. All of them were of great help to Su Qin. Su Qin slowly circled around the East Palace. When he returned to the right spring square again, he found that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had been waiting outside for a long time. Third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin and waved his hand. After 3 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's temperament has become much more dignified, and he has also aged a lot. White hair has already grown out of his temples. You're here? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Su Qin glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and asked casually, "Have you encountered something troubling recently?" Although the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has long been able to hide his emotions, how could he hide it from Su Qin? Some matters in the imperial court. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head, raised the wine pot in his left hand and said with a smile, "Third brother, let's drink today." Okay. Su Qin did not refuse. Every time the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was faced with a major decision, he would come to Su Qin to drink. After the two drank a few cups, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Su Qin with envy. Sometimes I really envy third brother. He stands aloof from worldly affairs and is peaceful and carefree. Unlike me, although I am the emperor of a country, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, sighed with emotion. Su Qin heard this, his eyes calm, and he said nothing. Although he seemed to be at ease, how many people in the world could stay in one place for decades and do the same thing? Let's not talk about this. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, put down his wine cup and asked, "Third brother, do you know what happened in Nanzhao 3 years ago?" Nanzhao? Su Qin looked at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. That's right. Third brother, you don't go out, so you shouldn't know. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly thought of something and continued, "The moon worship in Nanzhao was razed to the ground overnight, leaving behind a palm print that suppressed the entire mountain tisk. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, paused and said with emotion, "I always thought that there were no martial arts legends in this era, but now it seems that the palm print that destroyed the entire moon worship was probably left by a martial arts legend." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, knew about this more than 2 years ago, and he was extremely shocked and thought it was impossible. But as time passed, more and more information came to his ears, and he gradually accepted this fact. Su Qin heard this, glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and did not say anything. Not only did he know, but he was also the one who left the palm print. "I don't know in my lifetime if I can see the glory of a martial arts legend from afar." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked very longing. The Empire of Tang had been established for more than 500 years, and only Taizu was a martial arts legend. After Taizu, the strongest was only peak rank 1. As for this era, the Empire of Tang did not have a martial arts legend. Since Eunuch Zhao's death, there was not a single peak rank 1 in the entire palace of the Emperor of Tang. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was helpless, but there was nothing he could do. Martial arts cultivation in the early stage can be piled up with resources, but in the later stage, especially the transformation of a grade 1 great grandmaster, external resources may be useful, but the most important part can only be relied on oneself. Chapter 136. Soon 2 hours passed. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, got up and prepared to return to the Immortal Palace to deal with political affairs. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, smiled as he looked at Su Qin and said, "After chatting with the third brother today, I feel much less depressed." Su Qin shook his head and did not reply. The next day, in the Taiji Palace. Grab. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, sat on the dragon throne and looked down at the court. "I am very grateful for the vassals guarding the border for the Empire of Tang." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, did not beat around the bush and said directly. In the past 3 years, although the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, did not mention anything about removing the vassals, he had thought about it many times in his heart. In the end, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, realized that directly removing the vassals was not advisable. It would easily cause turmoil in the Empire of Tang and the vassals to rebel. But directly removing the vassals was not an option, but indirectly removing the vassals kept appearing in the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's mind. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, spent 3 years and finally came up with a way to indirectly weaken the vassals' strength. In the Taiji Palace. The court officials listened to the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's words and looked at each other, confused. A few years ago they saw the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, fly into a rage and wanted to remove the vassals. But now the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was very moved by the vassals' actions. Just when the court officials were confused, the Emperor of Tang Lisheng's words continued to ring. The vassals have worked hard and made great contributions, but they cannot be separated from the contributions of every child in the family. I have decided to pass down the order and allow the vassals to divide their fiefs to each child. The Emperor of Tang Lisheng said slowly. As soon as these words came out, the court officials quieted down. A few of the courtiers thought quickly and quickly understood the purpose of Emperor Lisheng's actions. It was nothing more than dividing the power of the kings in this way. It may not be seen in a short time, but in a long time, decades or hundreds of years will pass, and the disaster of the kings will inevitably be solved. Your Majesty, this is not appropriate. A court official immediately stood up and bowed to the Emperor of Tang Lisheng and said, the Emperor's eldest son has priority in the succession of the vassals. If your Majesty abolishes this law, the vassals will be dissatisfied. This minister was sincerely thinking for the Tang Empire. Even he could understand the deeper meaning of Emperor Lisheng's order, so how could the kings not understand? Don't worry, I'm just allowing it, not ordering it. If the vassals don't want to, they can refuse. The Emperor of Tang Lisheng was very calm. Before today he had thought everything clearly. After chatting with Su Qin for a while last night, the Emperor of Tang Lisheng was more clear about what he was doing. His decree was an open conspiracy. The vassals could not implement it, but what about their children? Normally, after the death of the old vassal, the eldest son would inherit the position of the vassal. As for the other brothers of the eldest son, they would be left to fend for themselves. In this case, once the Emperor of Tang Lisheng allowed the other children of the vassals to inherit the fiefs, it would inevitably cause division among the vassals. Except for the eldest son, the other children would spontaneously support the Emperor of Tang Lisheng. I've made up my mind. You don't have to say any more. The Emperor of Tang Lisheng saw that there were still courtiers who wanted to dissuade him, so he waved his hand and left the Taiji Palace. At the same time, outside the East Palace, Su Qin's eyes were calm as he looked in the direction of the Taiji Palace. In the end, he still came up with the decree of pushing grace. Su Qin shook his head slightly and sighed. Last night, Su Qin knew that the Emperor of Tang Lisheng had something on his mind, so he paid a little attention to the other party today. Sure enough, the Emperor of Tang Lisheng made a move today. However, although the decree of pushing grace could greatly solve the problem of the vassals, the Emperor of Tang Lisheng made a mistake. The order is reversed, Su Qin thought silently in his heart. If the Emperor of Tang Lisheng had already defeated all the vassals before implementing the decree of pushing grace, and they were all afraid of him, then implementing the decree of pushing grace would inevitably eliminate all future troubles and completely solve the problem of the vassals. But now, the most important premise had not been achieved, and implementing the decree of pushing grace at this time was tantamount to touching the bottom line of the vassals. Although Su Qin knew that the Emperor of Tang Lisheng's action was inappropriate, he did not stop it. If the Emperor of Tang Lisheng was assassinated, Su Qin might intervene, but when it came to national affairs, it was still up to the Emperor of Tang Lisheng to make his own decisions. It's good to let him suffer. Su Qin turned and walked back to the East Palace. For a long time, the Emperor of Tang Lisheng had been too smooth. Since he ascended the throne, the Emperor of Tang had paved everything for him, and Su Qin had secretly helped him clear the obstacles twice, which deterred the other countries, so everything went smoothly. Although the Emperor of Tang Lisheng had done a lot of practical things and the Empire of Tang was also thriving under his governance, but there were many things in this world that were not smooth sailing. As the Emperor of Tang Lisheng's orders spread throughout the territories of the 10 vassals, it caused a sensation among the children of the vassals. However, this sensation did not last long before it was suppressed by the vassals. The 10 vassals gathered in a small town. This town did not belong to any of the vassals' territories, but it was close to the vassals' territories, so generally when the vassals had something to discuss, they would choose to meet here. Haha. The Emperor of Tang in Chang and city is quite bold, daring to meddle in the affairs of us vassals. The Fanyang king's eyes were cold as he glanced at the other 9 vassals and sneered. When the order of pushing grace was passed to their territories, these vassals realized that something was wrong, and when they noticed the eager gazes of their children, they were sure that it was the Emperor of Tang's doing. With just a few words he can divide our territories and make brothers turn against each other. This the Emperor of Tang is not only bold but also vicious, the Shuafang king of Gojoseon also said, his tone full of coldness. As vassals, they were hereditary vassals, one generation of vassals and the next generation of vassals. They were high and mighty, so they naturally did not want to see their descendants constantly divided and eventually become playthings in the hands of the Emperor of Tang. Then what should we do now? The Emperor of Tang has begun to destroy the foundation of U.S. vassals. Are you still going to do nothing? The Norland king asked. He wanted to know what the other vassals were thinking. Of course we won't be indifferent. The Fanyang king shook his head and said, why don't we kill the Emperor of Tang? Since he's disobedient, we'll change the Emperor of Tang. The Jianan king suddenly said. As soon as he said that, the other vassals were immediately tempted. However, the Shuafang king of Gojoseon shook his head and said, so what if we kill him? Which of us vassals is not feared by the past the Emperor of Tang? Even if we kill this one, will the next one be obedient? Besides, the Emperor of Tang's palace should be overseen by some royal ancestor. It's not appropriate for us to assassinate the Emperor of Tang in his palace. The Shuafang king of Gojoseon said softly. Whether it was the death of the two peak grade 1 great grandmasters, Nanming King Wuyang and Yin Jiubat outside the imperial city, or the inexplicable disappearance of Yi Guqing and Shimen Chueshue in the Emperor of Tang's palace, it all showed that there was a great terror in the Emperor of Tang's palace. Chapter 137. The words of the Shuafang of Gojoseon made the other 9 vassals fall into silence. We can't do this and we can't do that. Are we supposed to tolerate the Emperor of Tang's probing? The king of Fanyang frowned and said with dissatisfaction. The king of Norland suddenly looked at the Shuafang of Gojoseon and asked, the Shuafang of Gojoseon, since you said so, you must have a solution, right? I do have a solution. Hearing this, the Shuafang of Gojoseon smiled and looked at the other vassals. We can't kill the Emperor of Tang, but we can teach him a lesson. As long as we let the Emperor of Tang know that it is extremely difficult for him to do anything to us vassals. As soon as the Shuafang of Gojoseon finished speaking, the other vassals' eyes suddenly lit up. Indeed, what the Shuafang of Gojoseon said made a lot of sense. The Emperor of Tang had always been extremely hostile to the vassals. Killing the Emperor of Tang would not solve any problem at all. Only by making the Emperor of Tang retreat and completely give up the idea of being hostile to the vassals could the problem be solved fundamentally. But how should we teach the Emperor of Tang a lesson? The provincial governor of Norland asked tentatively. The Shuafang of Gojoseon heard this and did not reply. Instead he looked at the other vassals. Over the years, you must have some results from your infiltration of the imperial court. The Shuafang of Gojoseon's words made all the vassals' faces change. The vassals were in charge of their territories and lived a carefree life far away from the emperor. But the vassals were not fools. Any vassal with a little foresight would know how to rope in the ministers and use them as pawns in the imperial court. In this way, no matter what happened in the imperial court, they would be the first to know. Shuafang of Gojoseon, why are you asking this? The king of Norland said with great vigilance. The 10 vassals were not united and had some friction with each other. Otherwise, they would not have chosen this place to meet. And the ministers they roped in were top secrets of the vassals. If the news spread and the Emperor of Tang found out, they would be roped in for nothing. It's very simple. Use these pawns to teach the Emperor of Tang a lesson. The Shuafang of Gojoseon looked at the 9 vassals and said, lesson. Please tell me more about it. The vassals looked at each other and asked when they heard this. Chang'an. Inside the palace. Taiji Palace. The Emperor of Gojoseon was in high spirits. Was of the to be in the vassal of Gojoseon. Mise of Goi, the Emperor of Esavs of Gojoseon at this moment. A minister stood up, bowed slightly and said loudly, Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope your majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. After the minister finished speaking, he knelt on the ground and did not get up. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng frowned slightly. He had already expressed his determination some time ago, and now a minister stood up to persuade him. This was something that the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng did not expect. Just when the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng was about to reprimand the minister, another minister stood up. Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng frowned and looked at the second minister. Before the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng spoke. Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. More and more ministers stood up and persuaded the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng. For a while, in the Taiji Palace, nearly half of the ministers knelt down and begged the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng to take back the imperial edict. Most of these kneeling ministers were 7th and 6th rank officials. They were usually very inconspicuous, but at this moment they all knelt together and there was an inexplicable momentum. The rest of the ministers who did not kneel saw this scene, and their expressions changed slightly. You? The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng's face was extremely ugly. At this moment, how could he not know that these ministers' behavior was hinted by the vassals from all over the country? The vassals were using this method to warn the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng that if he dared to interfere again, he would lose the throne. Good. You are really good. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng suddenly stood up and glared at all the kneeling ministers. I promoted you, put you in an important position and raised you, but you ran to the vassal's side? The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng was furious and felt betrayed. Someone come. The prefect of the wonderful pen shop, take them down, take these people down for me. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng said word by word. Suddenly, a large number of imperial guards swarmed in and escorted out all the officials who had tried to persuade him. And the court. After this happened, the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng naturally did not want to continue the court discussion. He waved his sleeves and left the Taiji Palace. In the Palace of Immortals, the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng sat on the dragon throne. Did I really do something wrong? The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng fell into self-doubt. If he was an incapable ruler, of course he would not care about the opinions of his ministers, but the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng happened to be a wise ruler. He paid great attention to the thoughts of his ministers, but just now the ministers in the court turned against him, which made the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng doubt his determination to remove the vassals. Was he really doing the right thing? A few days later, the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng fell ill in extreme self-doubt. Since the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng ascended the throne, for nearly 10 years, he had been conscientious and did not dare to have any negligence. Although there was no problem with his body, he had been under great mental pressure for a long time. The betrayal of the ministers was tantamount to the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng had a mental breakdown. For a time the palace was in chaos. Many ministers and Empress Su Yueyun gathered in the Palace of Immortals. After the imperial doctors checked the body of the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng, they frowned and did not dare to speak. None of the imperial doctors dared to promise that they could cure the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng. They did not even think of a way to ease the pain of the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng. Your Majesty, Empress Su Yueyun lay in front of the dragon throne, looking at the unconscious the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Sheng and wept. At the same time, the vassals who had been paying close attention to the changes in the court immediately learned of this. Ah, you want to do something to us vassals? Wait another 100 years. The King of Norland sneered. The other 9 vassals did the same. The palace. Outside the right spring square. Su Qin put his hands behind his back and scanned the Palace of Immortals with his powerful divine sense. A mental breakdown is not something that can be cured by ordinary medicine, Su Qin thought silently. The problem that the Emperor of Gojoseon was the various hidden dangers caused by a mental breakdown at the moment. If not treated in time, even if he survived, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and it would even affect Shoyuan. Forget it. Su Qin sighed softly, took a step and disappeared. The next moment, outside the Palace of Immortals, Su Qin's figure appeared silently. Chapter 138. Outside the Long Life Hall. Su Qin's eyes were calm as he prepared to enter the Long Life Hall. Stop, this is an important place in the palace. A eunuch stood in front of Su Qin and looked at Su Qin warily. However, before the eunuch could finish, he was interrupted. Little Da, step aside. This is the imperial uncle. The eunuch who often accompanied the Emperor of Tang changed his expression and immediately stopped the eunuch. Imperial uncle? The eunuch was confused, but since the eunuch had said so, he naturally did not dare to continue blocking Su Qin. Imperial uncle? The eunuch looked at Su Qin and said respectfully. Su Qin's expression did not change as he walked into the Long Life Hall unhurriedly. After Su Qin had completely entered the Long Life Hall, The eunuch who stopped Su Qin at first could not help but ask, "Imperial uncle? How come I've never seen this imperial uncle before?" The young eunuch said carefully, "Umph." The eunuch glared at the eunuch. "There are many things you don't know. If I hadn't stopped you just now, you would have made a big mistake." "What?" The eunuch was shocked. "I'll only say it once. In the entire palace, the imperial uncle is one of the 10 people you can't afford to offend. Do you understand now?" A hint of respect flashed in the eunuch's voice. He often followed the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and naturally knew that in front of Su Qin the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had never acted like an emperor. Moreover, only in front of Su Qin would the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, show a sincere smile. Based on this point alone, the eunuch knew that Su Qin was definitely one of the people that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, valued the most. In addition, Su Qin was the Empress's elder brother and Prince Li Yuan's third uncle. With so many identities, even an ordinary noble would not be as good as Su Qin. Within the longevity hall, the ministers were silent and the atmosphere was heavy. "Third brother, why are you here?" When Empress Su Yuan saw Su Qin, she immediately stood up and wiped her tears. "Third brother? Is he the third son of family Su?" Many officials looked at Su Qin and began to discuss in low voices. As important officials of the imperial court, they naturally knew of Su Qin, who had always been holed up in the imperial palace. These officials had always been curious about Su Qin. They knew that given the relationship between the emperor and his family Su, as long as Su Qin said the word, regardless of whether it was entering the court as an official or becoming a general in the army, it was a matter of one word. Power and wealth were at their fingertips. But Su Qin did not. Instead, he stayed in the imperial palace for 10 years, and even rarely left the imperial palace. This made many officials wonder if there really was a saint in the world who did not care about fame and wealth. Su Qin walked to the dragon bed and glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. At the moment, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was in a coma. His face was pale, and if it weren't for the occasional rise and fall of his chest, he would be no different from a dead man. "All of you leave," Su Qin said without looking at the officials. Hearing this, the officials' faces changed. It was not that they did not trust Su Qin, but if they all went out and something happened to the emperor, who would be responsible? Prince Li Yuan was still young and could not bear the heavy responsibility of the country. Only Empress Su Yuan was refreshed. Since Su Qin asked the others to go out, it meant that he had a way to save the Emperor of Tang. Su Yuan trusted Su Qin very much. If it weren't for Su Qin, she would probably still have yin qi in her body and could not give birth to a dragon child. "Since the third brother asked us to go out, let's go out." Empress Su Yuan looked at the officials and said, "Empress, this is against the rules." Some of the officials could not help but ask, "Against the rules?" Empress Su Yuan frowned and said coldly, "If anything happens, I will take responsibility. Is this against the rules?" The officials looked at each other and could only bow and say, "Yes." Su Yuan, the officials, eunuchs, and maids all left the Palace of Immortals and waited outside. For a moment, only Su Qin, the Emperor of Tang, and Li Sheng were left in the huge Palace of Immortals. "I asked you to wait. Why are you in such a hurry?" Su Qin raised his right hand, and a trace of true essence entered the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's body. In an instant, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's body trembled, and his exhausted body suddenly began to recover quickly. Arhat's true essence had the effect of changing the body and cleansing the marrow. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's body at this moment, withstanding a trace of Arhat's true essence, was like a sweet dew after a long drought. Even his pale face began to turn red. However, Su Qin did not stop. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had a mental breakdown, not a physical one. The next moment, Su Qin stretched out his index finger and slowly pressed it between the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's eyebrows. Clang! As if a bronze bell rang, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, felt himself suddenly awaken from a daze. "This is..." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly opened his eyes. "Third brother." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin and relaxed. A moment later, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said weakly, "It seems that third brother saved me." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, although unconscious, had a vague perception of the outside world and knew that Su Qin had come to save him. "It's nothing." Su Qin shook his head slightly and looked at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and said, "You've been on the throne for almost 10 years. Although you seem to be calm, in fact, you haven't suffered any setbacks. Third brother taught me a lesson." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, smiled bitterly. At this moment he also realized where his problem was. Su Qin glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and turned to walk out of the longevity hall. After Su Qin left, many ministers immediately rushed in. Your Majesty, are you okay? When the ministers saw that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had woken up, they were so excited that they burst into tears. Empress Su Yueyun's face was full of joy. Your Majesty, can we take a look at your body? At this moment, a royal doctor who looked very old age said. Take a look. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, nodded slightly. A moment later, the royal doctor finished looking at the Emperor of Tang's body, and his face was full of disbelief. Impossible. How is this possible? Full of essence, qi and spirit. How did this happen? The old age royal doctor's face was full of shock. In his eyes, even if the Emperor of Tang woke up, it would take some time for him to recover. But at this moment, the Emperor of Tang's body and spirit couldn't be any better. What kind of medical skill is this? The old age royal doctor was dumbfounded and in disbelief. After Su Qin saved the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, he returned to the right spring square again. It's about time. I can start breaking through. Su Qin sat cross-legged and made a decision in his heart. Since reaching level 4 complete a few months ago, Su Qin had been adjusting his state, and now it was about time. Thinking of this, Su Qin slowly closed his eyes, and the aura in his body began to rise and circulate. Half a day later, Su Qin's aura began to calm and contract as if it was condensed to a point. Then, whoosh! A terrifying aura soared into the sky, almost breaking through the barrier of the heaven and earth great array in the right spring square. I finally reached level 5. Su Qin opened his eyes, and his mind entered his body, carefully feeling the changes in his body. Chapter 139. Not bad. After stepping into the 5th heaven, whether it's the physical body, true essence, or divine sense, they have all increased by several times. Su Qin nodded slightly, his thoughts fluctuating. The improvement from the 4th heaven to the 5th heaven was not as qualitative as the breakthrough from the 3rd heaven to the 4th heaven, but it still made Su Qin very satisfied. After all, at his level, even the slightest bit of improvement was extremely difficult, let alone crossing over to the next realm. After the 5th heaven, it's the 6th heaven. As for the 7th heaven above the 6th heaven, it can be considered the true peak of the Venerable Arhat. Su Qin touched his chin, his thoughts wandering. According to what Su Qin learned from the moon worship's moon goddess, even in the depths of the endless ocean, the 7th heaven mythical realm was extremely rare. Even if they existed, they would pursue the illusory path of the land immortals and would not show their traces in front of outsiders. It's said that only by reaching the 7th heaven Arhat can there be hope of condensing a miniature domain. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. Whether it was the Venerable Arhat or the martial arts legends, the biggest difference between them and the martial arts 9 grades was the control of the power of heaven and earth. However, the power of heaven and earth was vast and boundless. Even the invincible 9th heaven Arhat could not control all of the power of heaven and earth. Therefore, the cultivation at the later stage of Arhat's level was to constantly compress and condense the power of heaven and earth that one controlled to form a miniature domain. The miniature domain might not be comparable to the power of heaven and earth in terms of range, but in terms of quality, it far surpassed the power of heaven and earth. However, to compress and condense the power of heaven and earth was tantamount to fighting against the heaven and earth. How difficult was that? Even the Venerable Arhat of the 7th heaven only had hope of condensing a miniature domain. As for whether one could successfully condense it, it depended on whether one's foundation was strong enough. The one who had a miniature domain must be the Venerable Arhat of the 7th heaven. However, the Venerable Arhat of the 7th heaven did not necessarily have a miniature domain. Forget it, it's too early for me to think about this. Su Qin shook his head and sighed. Now he had just entered the 5th layer of Arhat. He was still some distance away from the 6th layer of heaven, not to mention the 7th layer of heaven. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, seems to be recovering well. Su Qin raised his head slightly and looked in the direction of the Longevity Temple. At this moment, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was leisurely eating the food prepared by the imperial chef. Obviously, he had recovered from the betrayal of his subjects. When Su Qin saw this, a smile appeared on his face. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was Su Qin's brother-in-law, but he was also the Emperor of the Empire of Tang. For the sake of his younger sister, Su Yueyun, when the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was in mortal danger, Su Qin would lend a helping hand. But in other matters, Su Qin was not willing to interfere. Otherwise, whenever the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was in trouble, Su Qin would lend a hand. Then what was the point of cultivating? There were billions of living beings in the empire of Tang, and there were so many big and small matters every day. If Su Qin took care of everything, he would probably not be able to cultivate to the earth immortal realm even if he died of old age. Su Qin stayed in the palace and he valued the peace and quiet here. If he got involved in the political affairs of the empire of Tang, wouldn't it be the opposite of him? Besides, Su Qin had done enough for the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. If it weren't for Su Qin, the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, would have died in the hands of assassins when he was in the family Su. Not to mention the rebellion of Prince Sun, which was also quelled by Su Qin. Su Qin saved the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, 3 times, and even helped him ascend to the throne. This was enough to offset the fact that he was borrowing the sign-in from the imperial palace. For the next period of time, I will go into seclusion to stabilize the 5th heavenly layer. Su Qin's thoughts turned quickly, and he made a decision in his heart. During the seclusion, Su Qin put a wisp of his mind on the family Su and the emperor of Tang to ensure that their lives would not be in danger. As for other things, he completely put them down. And just when Su Qin began his seclusion, within the empire of Tang, waves were brewing. Since the 10 kings secretly instigated their ministers to defect to the emperor of Tang, and after learning that the emperor of Tang fell ill, they became even more arrogant. The Jiangnan king even mocked the emperor of Tang in public. When the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, learned of this news, his expression did not change at all. Instead, he did what he should do. This move made the 10 kings feel that the emperor of Tang was admitting defeat. For a time, the power of the kings in the empire of Tang was monstrous. Time slowly passed by. 2 years passed in a blink of an eye. In these 2 years, the kings became more and more confident. The Anshi king even asked the emperor of Tang for another piece of land. When this matter spread to the imperial court, it directly made all the civil and military officials indignant. The territories of the 10 vassal kings together accounted for nearly 1/5 of the entire territory of the Tang Empire. If they were to give out more land, wouldn't they have to give away half of the Tang Empire? Moreover, once this began, the kings would do it a second time and a third time. At that time, the empire of Tang might have to change its name directly. However, at this time, the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, ordered the Forbidden Army to directly fire all the spy strongholds from the 10 kings in Chang'an City. In addition, all the ministers who had a little relationship with the 10 kings, regardless of their official position, were arrested. It turned out, in these 2 years, the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, did not do nothing. Instead, he secretly investigated all the spies and chess pieces arranged by the 10 kings in Chang'an City. Until today, when the 10 kings were most arrogant, he quickly took action and removed all the spies buried by the 10 kings in Chang'an City. And the emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's action was very successful. 2 years of forbearance in exchange for an outbreak, which directly stunned the 10 kings. It was still in the small town. The 10 kings gathered here again. What happened? Didn't the emperor of Tang admit defeat? Why did I lose contact with all the spies I put in Chang'an overnight? The Jiangnan king looked extremely ugly and almost roared out. You ask me, how do I know? The Hudong king also looked gloomy and impatient. He was still worried about the chess pieces he buried in Chang'an City. How could he pay attention to the Jiangnan king's words? We've lost the trouble. Without the spies and spies, we kings are like blind men who know nothing about Chang'an City. The Fanyang king sighed and looked at the other kings. What should we do now? As expected, the emperor of Tang is vicious. 2 years ago, when he fell ill because of anger, I was still wondering if it was true. Now, it seems that it was a deliberate fake news to make us lower our guard and reveal flaws. The Shuafang king of Gojoseon sighed softly. If the vassals also realized the seriousness of the matter, once the spies buried in Chang'an were removed, they would not be able to know anything about Chang'an. It was tantamount to having a knife hanging over their heads, and they did not know when it would fall. Just when these kings were at a loss, a voice suddenly sounded. It's very simple. You can directly rebel against the emperor of Tang. Chapter 140. It's very simple. You can directly rebel against the emperor of Tang. As soon as these words came out, the 10 kings on the field were suddenly shocked. Who is it? The Shuafang of Gojoseon looked dignified and kept looking around. The other 9 kings were the same because the voice that suddenly sounded just now did not belong to any of them. Don't be afraid. I have no malice. At this time, A man in a white robe with an indifferent expression slowly walked out and stood in front of the 10 kings. Who are you? How do you know this place? The Shuafeng of Gojoseon looked at the indifferent man and said word by word. Only the 10 kings knew about this town, and it has long been surrounded by many of the king's subordinates and confidants, and no one is allowed to enter. The indifferent man was able to sneak in quietly. He is at least a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know that I am here to help you. The indifferent man showed a smile on his face and said, Help us. The 10 kings looked at each other and their thoughts turned quickly. If it was someone else who dared to say this in front of the 10 kings, they would have already been taken down. But the indifferent man can appear here in the hearts of the kings. His means are absolutely unfathomable, and he is a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Such a powerhouse's words are naturally persuasive. Help us. How are you going to help us? The Shuafeng of Gojoseon was silent for a while and asked. It's very simple. The indifferent man looked at the Shuafeng of Gojoseon. The reason why you don't dare to rebel against the Emperor of Tang now is that you are worried about the Li royal ancestor in the Emperor of Tang's palace. The indifferent man paused and continued, But now, the ancestor in the Emperor of Tang's palace, just leave it to us. We, the Shuafeng of Gojoseon keenly grasped the word, we in the indifferent man's words. How can we trust you? The Shuafeng of Gojoseon was very vigilant. Although he already had some guesses in his mind, he still wanted to know the exact answer. The Emperor of Tang's palace. Su Qin finally walked out of the right spring square. In these 2 years, not only have I stabilized my cultivation at the 5th heavenly layer, but I've also improved further. Even if I'm not at the peak of the 5th heavenly layer, I'm not far from it. Su Qin walked unhurriedly through the eastern palace as he thought to himself happily. Let's see what happened in the past 2 years. Su Qin released his divine will, which swept across Chang and city in an instant. The Emperor of Tang has finally learned to endure? Su Qin only needed to use his divine sense to roughly understand what had happened recently. It was nothing more than the Emperor of Tang removing all the spies and chess pieces of the vassals overnight. That's a qualified emperor. Su Qin nodded slightly. It was obvious that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had made rapid progress. At least he knew when to endure and when to explode. Third uncle. You're out? At this time, Princess Li Wan saw Su Qin and immediately shouted loudly. In the past 2 years, Su Qin was either in seclusion or signing in. As for other things, he didn't care about them. Even if the Emperor of Tang came looking for him sometimes, he might not be able to see him. Third uncle. Princess Li Wan trotted to Su Qin, waved her fist and said proudly, Third uncle, look, I'm already a rank 9 martial artist. If it was someone else in the palace, a rank 9 martial artist might not be worth mentioning, but Princess Li Wan wasn't even 10 years old. To be able to develop inner force and become a rank 9 martial artist at this age, in addition to the abundant martial arts resources in the palace, it was also because of Princess Li Wan's own talent and hard work. Not bad. Su Qin just came out of seclusion and was in a good mood. He said casually, If you have any questions about martial arts in the future, you can come to me. Really? Princess Li Wan's eyes suddenly widened. After chatting with Princess Li Wan for a while, Su Qin walked out of the East Palace and strolled around the palace. Speaking of which, it's been a while since I signed in at the Ancestral Temple. When Su Qin passed by the Ancestral Temple of the palace, he suddenly stopped in thought. Su Qin glanced at the guardian outside the Ancestral Temple and slowly walked to the front of the Ancestral Temple. System sign in. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and he muttered in his heart. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received 9 Yao Bao. A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. 9 Yao Bao? Su Qin's heart skipped a beat. He has signed in at the palace for more than 10 years, and most of the treasures he signed in were divine arts, pills, and spiritual kingdoms. Treasures like 9 Yao Bao, that sound like a weapon, are rare, and there are only a few hundred of them. I'll go back and take a look. After signing in, Su Qin's goal was achieved and he returned to the East Palace. In the right spring square. Su Qin sat cross-legged, his mind integrated into the system space. In a corner of the system space, an illusory bow made entirely of divine light slowly swayed. This is the 9 Yao Bao? Su Qin looked a little surprised. The 9 Yao Bao gave him the feeling that it didn't exist at all. Where's the arrow? Since it's a bao, why is there no arrow? Su Qin frowned and his mind began to slowly integrate into the 9 Yao Bao. In an instant, All kinds of information flooded into his mind. After a while, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. Using divine sense as a guide and world's essence qi as an arrow, the arrow will kill. This is the Nine Yao Bao? Su Qin's thoughts were fluctuating. According to the information in the Nine Yao Bao, one must at least have the divine sense of a venerable arhat to be able to pull the Nine Yao Bao. And the power displayed by the Nine Yao Bao depends on the user's divine sense. In other words, the stronger the divine sense, the power of the Nine Yao Bao will skyrocket without limit. This Nine Yao Bao has already transcended matter. It's completely a spiritual treasure. Su Qin looked amazed and muttered to himself. Whether it's the spirit or divine sense, they are all illusory and have no substance. Even if there is a spiritual secret technique like moon forging divine sense, Su Qin can roughly understand it. The Xiaobooking, Xiaoshutting, that the readers used to use before had already died. Now they were basically using the mommy reading app. After all, at his level he can barely see the reorganization and dispersion of the divine sense. Even if there is no moon-forging divine sense, sooner or later Su Qin will figure out other secret techniques to forge divine sense. It's just that this Nine Yao Bao, until now Su Qin still doesn't know what kind of material the Nine Yao Bao is made of. No matter what. The Nine Yao Bao is mine. Su Qin calmed down and stopped thinking about it. Anyway, now that the Nine Yao Bao has recognized him as its master, as long as Su Qin is willing, he can pull the bao at any time, and that's enough. Taiji Palace. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng is discussing state affairs with the civil and military officials. Suddenly, at this moment, a forbidden army soldier hurried over and knelt on the ground with a plop. Your Majesty, there is an urgent report from the border. Speak. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's expression froze and said, Your Majesty, the 10 vassal kings suddenly joined forces and led an army of millions towards Jianghu. As soon as this came out, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's expression changed drastically. Showbiges, opening sign in Buddha's palm. Chapter 141. In the Taiji Palace. When they heard that the 10 kings were going to attack Chang, and with millions of troops, everyone was shocked. Many ministers did not expect that the 10 kings would dare to rebel like this. How is it possible? The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng was shocked and puzzled at the same time. In the past few years he also had some understanding of the 10 kings. Grab. Although the 10 kings seemed to be united on the surface, in fact there were many contradictions between them and no one trusted each other. If the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng openly forced them, the 10 kings might join forces against a common enemy, but the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng did not force them too much. He just pulled out the spies that the kings had placed in Chang'an. Although it seemed to have a great impact on the kings, in fact it did not hurt them. After all, the foundation of the kings was in their own fiefdoms. As long as the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng did not reach their fiefdoms, everything could be saved. Although the kings were ambitious, they did not dare to rebel openly, because it was equivalent to completely falling out with the Empire of Tang, and there was no room for maneuver. It would be good if they succeeded. What if they failed? The kings did not dare to gamble at all. What was the reason that made the vassal kings so determined to rebel? The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng subconsciously noticed that there was something wrong, but he could not figure it out. Your Majesty, what should we do now? At this time, a minister stood up and asked with a worried face. What should we do? The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng suddenly stood up, and a trace of coldness appeared on his face. Since they want to fight, then I will fight with them. If the kings did not rebel, Li Sheng did not mind spending decades to slowly remove the king's wings and finally cut off the vassals. But now the kings had already mobilized millions of troops and were about to attack Chang'an. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng had no other choice. If he flinched at this time he would not only lose face for himself, but also the face of the Li royal family. Minister of War. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng turned his gaze to the Minister of War. Your subject is here. The Minister of War stepped forward and bowed. Assemble the army. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng said in a deep voice. As you command. The Minister of War bowed. Oh, the triplets are here. Outside Right Spring Square. Third uncle. Princess Li Wan stood there and shouted towards the Right Spring Square. Why are you here? Su Qin walked out, glanced at Princess Li Wan and asked casually. Didn't third uncle say that he could come over if he had any questions regarding martial arts? Princess Li Wan blinked her big eyes and said pitifully, could it be that third uncle has forgotten? Okay, ask away. Su Qin shook his head. He didn't know where Princess Li Yuan learned to act like a spoiled child from. He remembered that his little sister Su Yueyun didn't know how to do this, right? Did Li Yuan learn martial arts? Su Qin asked. Li Yuan was the son of Li Xing, the Emperor of Tang and the future crown prince. Unlike Princess Li Yuan was very afraid of Su Qin. When he saw Su Qin he was like a mouse seeing a cat. He has no interest in martial arts at all. I don't even want to talk to him. Princess Li Yuan shook her head like a little adult. Yesterday I beat him up and told him to fight with me for delicious food. Su Qin was speechless when he heard that. However, although Princess Li Yuan had just entered the 9th level, she had no problem beating up a child less than 10 years old like Li Yuan. Tell me about your doubts. Su Qin didn't continue to talk about other topics and said directly. Third uncle, every time I circulate my martial arts I feel a little sluggish. I've asked a few eunuchs but they don't know what's wrong. They just let me try a few more times? Princess Li Yuan looked at Su Qin expectantly. For as long as she could remember, Su Qin had always stayed in the right spring square as if he had never left. Even her father respected Su Qin very much. He didn't see Su Qin as an ordinary person at all. Therefore, in Princess Li Yuan's heart, Su Qin should be a great expert. Try to circulate your martial arts now. Su Qin glanced at Princess Li Yuan. He had a rough idea of the reason, but he still let her circulate her martial arts for a while. Okay. Princess Li Yuan immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and circulated her martial arts slowly. In less than a moment, Su Qin stopped her. You should change your cultivation technique. Su Qin said. The problem faced by Princess Li Yuan is that her cultivation technique is not compatible with her own physique. Of course, the incompatibility here is extremely slight. Even a grade 1 great grandmaster would find it difficult to detect. But in Su Qin's eyes, it's natural for him to see it. Ha! Change my cultivation technique? Princess Li Yuan was puzzled. The cultivation technique she cultivates is already the best cultivation technique in the entire palace of the Emperor of Tang. If she wants to change it, she really doesn't know which one to change. Wait a minute. Su Qin glanced at Princess Li Yuan and turned back to the right spring square. Su Qin walked out, holding a piece of paper with wet ink in his hand. You can cultivate according to this? Su Qin asked casually. On the paper was a cultivation technique Su Qin has obtained in the past few years. Although it is not as good as the other cultivation techniques Su Qin obtained, it is the most suitable cultivation technique for Princess Li Yuan's physique. Princess Li Yuan took the paper and looked at it carefully. Suddenly, her eyes widened in disbelief. Although she is only a grade 9 martial artist, Princess Li Yuan can faintly perceive that the cultivation technique Su Qin gave her seems to be much better than all the cultivation techniques in the Imperial Palace. Remember, on the path of martial arts, step by step is the most important. Don't be impatient. After Su Qin gave a few words of advice, he let Princess Li Yuan go back. After Princess Li Yuan left, Su Qin turned his eyes and looked in the direction of the border. The 10 vassal kings joined forces and sent millions of troops? Su Qin frowned slightly. Since the news came out in the morning, Jianghu and city has been in a state of panic, and even people in the imperial palace are gossiping. At the same time, thousands of miles away from Jianghu and city, millions of vassal kings' troops are camping here. And behind the army, the 10 vassal kings gathered in a military camp. My lord, we've already done as you said. When the army arrives at Jianghu and city, the old monster in the imperial palace will be handed over to you. Jianan King looked at the indifferent man not far away, and his tone was slightly respectful. The other 9 vassal kings also showed respect when they heard this. If it weren't for the indifferent man revealing his identity, they would never dare to risk it all and rebel. The vassal kings are independent. Although they nominally listen to the orders of the Emperor of Tang, in fact they are a country of China. Glory, wealth, power, and beauties they can enjoy for generations. Under this premise, how could the vassal kings dare to take the risk of rebellion? But the benefits given by the indifferent man were too great, and the vassal kings felt that the rebellion would not fail, so they gambled everything. Chapter 142. Don't worry. The indifferent man shook his head slightly. The indifferent man's performance was tantamount to giving the kings infinite confidence. At this moment, even if they were in the army, they began to talk and laugh. However, speaking of which, the Empire of Tang really has some heritage. There is an ancestor hidden in the imperial palace. If it weren't for Sir, we really wouldn't dare to rebel. Grab grab. A smile appeared on the Fanyang king's face as he said with emotion. Indeed, after all, the empire has been established for more than 500 years. The other kings felt the same way and kept nodding. When we arrive at Chang'an City, it will be fine if the Grand Master of the Tang Imperial Palace does not appear. But if he does, with my lord holding him back, we can let our million-strong army exhaust him to death. A trace of ruthlessness appeared on the biting king's face. In this world, martial artists are rampant, but the countries are still above martial artists. Why is this? Of course it's because of the army. Under the legend realm, even if a peak grade 1 great grandmaster is trapped in an army of millions, they will be exhausted to death. Of course, no peak grade 1 great grandmaster will take the initiative to jump into an army of millions. With the terrifying speed of a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, if they want to escape, it is impossible for an army of millions to catch up. But the premise of all this is that there is no other peak grade 1 great grandmaster to stop them. If there is a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, then with an army of millions, it will be a real inescapable net for any peak grade 1 great grandmaster. When we break through Chang'an City, I will personally cut off the Emperor of Tang's head and let him know that we kings are not at his mercy. The Jiangnan king sneered. Okay. Have you thought about how to divide the country after destroying the Empire of Tang? At this time, the indifferent man suddenly said. Divide the country. As soon as these words came out, the eyes of the 10 kings suddenly became fiery. Wasn't the reason why they risked rebellion for this moment? Sir. We have thought about it. When the time comes, we will divide the Empire of Tang equally. The king of Gojoseon's eyes flashed and said respectfully to the indifferent man. Equally? The indifferent man looked at the other vassals with a faint smile. If it was something else, they could split it equally. However, who wouldn't want to own the entire country? The Emperor of Tang's palace. Taiji Palace. Some soldiers brought in information from the front lines. There seems to be a grade 1 great grandmaster in the King Coalition army? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, glanced at him. And there's more than one? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked extremely solemn. Although he had long guessed that there must be some reason for the sudden rebellion of the 10 kings, the biggest possibility was that they had some kind of confidence. However, the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng did not expect that the other party's backing was actually more than one peak grade 1 great grandmaster. It must be known that even when the Emperor of Tang was alive, the only peak grade 1 great grandmaster in the Empire of Tang was Eunuch Xiao. Order all troops to retreat and do not contact the other party. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Although this is equivalent to giving up part of the territory of the Empire of Tang and letting the King Coalition army pressure the border, there is no other way. The other party has a grade 1 great grandmaster, coupled with an army of millions. Ordinary the Empire of Tang's army can't resist at all. In that case, why not gather all forces and fight to the death outside Chang'an City? Although the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, knows that there are powerhouses in the Imperial Palace, but since the kings dare to rebel, they must have expected this and even thought of a way. After all, it is no secret that the powerhouse in the Emperor of Tang's palace has taken action several times. Although the kings are ambitious, they are not fools. Before the rebellion, they must have weighed the pros and cons. After confirming that they have the confidence, they will start the rebellion. Right Spring Square. Empress Su Yueyun's face was full of worry. Third brother, recently His Majesty has been unable to sleep because of the rebellion. Empress Su Yueyun sighed softly. I also heard about this. Su Qin nodded slightly and said casually, but you don't have to worry, everything will be over soon. It will be over soon? Empress Su Yueyun wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. Empress Su Yueyun knows the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, very well. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, wouldn't be unable to sleep all night if he had the confidence? Third brother. I'm here to discuss something with you. Empress Su Yueyun thought for a while and said carefully. What is it? Su Qin was slightly surprised. It was the first time he saw his little sister talk to him in such a tone. Tonight, can you take Wan-er and Yuan-er out of Chang'an City? Su Yueyun's eyes were red. Leave Chang'an City? Su Qin immediately understood what Su Yueyun was worried about. The 10 kings had millions of troops, and the situation of the Empire of Tang was not optimistic. If Chang'an City was finally breached, Su Qin could escape with Li Wan and Li Yuan. Don't worry. Su Qin smiled and said, go back and sleep and everything will be fine when you wake up. I hope so. Empress Su Yueyun sighed softly and said a few more words to Su Qin before leaving the right spring square. After Su Yueyun completely disappeared, Su Qin slowly walked out of the right spring square and looked up in the direction of the king's army. Rebellion? Millions of troops? There was an inexplicable vortex slowly rotating in Su Qin's pupils. The Eye of Truth opened instantly and observed the Qi of heaven and earth. With the help of the celestial Qi refining technique, Su Qin could instantly see through half of the empire of Tang. If the 10 kings stayed in their respective territories, I wouldn't bother to do anything. Su Qin looked calm. But now you want to rebel? Su Qin's eyes were deep. Found you. Su Qin seemed to have found something and instantly locked onto a position thousands of miles away. Then, Su Qin took a step forward, stretched out his right hand and slightly grasped the void. Layers of divine light gathered. In an instant, a bow-shaped void completely composed of divine light appeared in Su Qin's hand. The next moment, Su Qin held the bow in his right hand and put his left hand on the string. Bang! The bow was drawn to a full moon. Boom! The world's essence Qi within a few miles and dozens of miles suddenly became violent, forming a monstrous wave of world's essence Qi that continued to rush towards Su Qin. To be precise, it was converging towards the 9 Yao Bao in Su Qin's hand. This scene was extremely shocking. A terrifying aura spread across dozens of miles in an instant. All the martial artists in the upper realm felt a great sense of oppression descending. That is, outside the Imperial Palace Ancestral Temple, the temple keeper's face changed wildly. At this moment he could almost feel that the world's essence Qi was completely out of control and was rushing towards the Imperial Palace. What the hell is going on? The temple keeper was shocked and trembled all over. Not only the temple keeper, but the dozens of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the Imperial Palace were also terrified. At this moment they seemed to be facing the true power of heaven and earth. And at this time, in front of the right spring square, Su Qin held the 9 Yao Bao in his right hand and pulled the bowstring with his left hand. Endless world's essence Qi gathered and formed an illusory arrow on the 9 Yao Bao. As soon as the arrow was formed, it quickly condensed from illusory to real. A trace of shocking killing intent lingered and collided on the arrow, bursting out countless flashes of light more terrifying than thunder and lightning. Chapter 143. Inside the Long Life Temple. The Emperor of Tang Lisheng was worried about the Qing coalition. At this moment, the Emperor of Tang Lisheng suddenly felt a sense of trepidation. Although ordinary people can't detect the fluctuations of world's essence Qi, with the violent gathering of world's essence Qi, they will still feel a sense of oppression, as if they are being stared at by some prehistoric beast. What's going on? The Emperor of Tang Lisheng looked surprised. Your Majesty. Eunuch Lu's figure instantly appeared in front of the Emperor of Tang Lisheng and said with a trembling voice, the world's essence Qi is completely out of control. Eunuch Lu's tone showed great horror. As a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, Eunuch Lu is naturally very sensitive to the world's essence Qi. However, at this moment he found that the originally docile world's essence Qi suddenly became violent. Surrounded by such world's essence Qi, Eunuch Lu only felt that 90% of his strength was suppressed, and this suppression was gradually increasing. The world's essence Qi suddenly gathered and became violent. For ordinary people, they may feel a little depressed and uneasy, but in the eyes of the martial artists in the upper realm who have been cleansed by the world's essence Qi, it was tantamount to a natural disaster. Not only Eunuch Lu, but all the martial artists in the upper realm in Chang and city were the same. At the same time, in front of the right spring square, Su Qin held the 9 Yao Bao and his eyes were deep. At this moment, the arrow on the 9 Yao Bao has completely condensed into a solid entity. Phew. Absorb. The arrow was constantly breathing as if it had a life of its own, swallowing the world's essence Qi from all directions. It's almost done. Su Qin narrowed his eyes and slowly adjusted the arrow, aiming at the position locked by Eyes of Truth and Celestial Gaze. Then, bang. Su Qin released the 9 Yao Bao with his left hand. Wang. Like a stone thrown into a lake. The Navagraha arrow brimming with killing intent turned into a streak of resplendent divine light as it shot towards a certain location at an extremely terrifying speed. At this moment, whether it was the forbidden army and warriors in the Imperial Palace, or the countless commoners in Chang, and they all saw an unforgettable scene. A beam of divine light shot up into the sky from the depths of the palace and then disappeared into the sky. Right Spring Square. Su Qin loosened his grip on the 9 Yao Bao and stored it in the system storage. With the disappearance of the 9 Yao Bao, the yuan qi of heaven and earth that had suddenly become violent also gradually calmed down. It spread in all directions and returned to a radius of dozens of miles. I didn't expect the 9 Yao Bao to consume so much energy. If I shoot dozens of arrows in a row, won't I have to use up 10% of my divine will? Su Qin was amazed. The 9 Yao Bao was a pure divine sense artifact. Pulling the 9 Yao Bao didn't require physical strength or true yuan, only enough divine sense. I can feel that the arrow just now was not my limit. If I continue to accumulate power, the power of the arrow will increase infinitely, but at the same time, during the accumulation of power, the consumption of my divine consciousness will increase. Su Qin carefully experienced the feeling of pulling the bow just now. Su Qin even felt that if he accumulated power to the end and exhausted all of his divine will, the arrow he shot would definitely be able to look down on the martial arts legends. Except for the 7th level martial arts legends who had condensed a miniature territory, no other martial arts legends would be able to block this arrow. Of course, Su Qin wouldn't really try it. For any martial artist who had condensed their divine will, once their divine will was exhausted, their strength would be greatly reduced. Although Su Qin had all kinds of trump cards, and even if his divine will was exhausted, he still had other means, but he wouldn't put himself in danger. When I pulled the 9 Yao Bao just now, the yuan qi of heaven and earth that gathered was completely forced? Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look on his face. Normally, the yuan qi of heaven and earth gathered by a heaven and earth array like the essence gathering paradise would be heavily filtered by the array. The yuan qi of heaven and earth was stable and could be absorbed by Su Qin. But the yuan qi of heaven and earth that was drawn by the 9 Yao Bao just now was completely violent. The king's army. Reporting the Empire of Tang's army has begun to retreat. They probably don't plan to come in contact with us. A soldier quickly walked in, knelt down on one knee and reported respectfully. Retreated? Could it be that the Emperor of Tang is afraid? Hearing this, King Anyang sneered. The more the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng acted like this, the more guilty and uncertain he was. The Emperor of Tang's intention is probably to gather all of his forces and have a showdown with us outside Chang'an City. The Shuafeng of Gojosian thought for a while and said with admiration in his voice. Even if he was standing on the opposite side, the Shuafeng of Gojosian felt that the Emperor of Tang's choice was not wrong. Giving up a small part of his territory in exchange for the gathering of forces and increasing his chances of winning. It could be said that the Emperor of Tang had done everything he could. Unfortunately, the Shuafeng of Gojosian sighed softly, looked at the indifferent man not far away and said respectfully, "With Lord here, the Emperor of Tang can only be defeated." As soon as he said this, a smile appeared on the faces of the other 9 kings. The indifferent man also smiled slightly and did not say anything. Just as the kings were thinking about how to divide the treasury of the Empire of Tang after taking down Chang'an City, another soldier hurriedly rushed in. Outside, something happened outside. The soldier's tone was hurried and revealed his fear. Something happened? King Jianan frowned. At this moment they were surrounded by hundreds of thousands of troops. What could happen? The Shuafeng of Gojosian was also puzzled. In his view, with millions of troops protecting them, plus the indifferent man and other peak grade 1 beside them, they should be at their safest. How could something happen? Only the indifferent man's face changed. He directly got up and left the camp. Seeing this, the 10 kings looked at each other and also followed out. When the 10 kings walked out of the camp, they noticed a divine light faintly appearing at the end of the sky, under the shocked eyes of the kings. The divine light continued to approach, getting bigger and bigger, and finally faintly formed the shape of a huge arrow, crossing thousands of miles and shooting over. Not good. The Shuafeng of Gojosian's scalp exploded. Not only the Shuafeng of Gojosian, but the indifferent man next to him also broke out in cold sweat. The next moment, the divine light transformed by the huge arrow arrived in an instant and completely covered the camp where the 10 kings were. No. At the moment when the divine light of the arrow shrouded, several roars faintly came from the military seal. In a trance, the aura of a peak grade 1 suddenly burst out. However, these auras only lasted for an instant. In fact, they did not even last for an instant before they were completely obliterated by the divine light that the huge arrow had turned into. Wherever the arrow passed, everything was annihilated under the violent power. The 10 kings didn't even have time to react and had already turned into nothingness. Chapter 144. Silence. A deathly silence. The rest of the king's army stared blankly as the 10 kings were annihilated under the divine light. Their hearts suffered an unprecedented impact. The divine light that shot from the end of the heavenly canopy just now only covered the vicinity of the 10 kings. Therefore, even though tens of thousands of soldiers were affected, even more soldiers could only watch helplessly as their lords turned into nothingness, leaving nothing behind. No. This is impossible. Some soldiers' eyes were bloodshot, they couldn't believe it. They followed the kings to rebel, and they had already thought of what the worst outcome would be. But even if the rebellion failed in the end, they would have to go through a fierce battle. But now, what is this? They didn't even see the army of the Empire of Tang, and their kings were annihilated by a divine light? Countless soldiers rubbed their eyes fiercely, hoping that everything they saw just now was an illusion. However, it was a pity. As time went by, panic continued to spread, and these soldiers could only accept this result. It was real. All of this was real. They gambled everything, mobilized millions of troops, and wanted to rebel and change the world. But it was all over before it even started. Is it possible that the Li family of the Empire of Tang really got the mandate of heaven? Our rebellion will directly cause heaven to punish us? Some of the soldiers had completely broken down and yelled hysterically. In fact, it was not only the soldiers who had this idea. When countless people saw the divine light completely enveloping the 10 vassals, they subconsciously thought that other than the heavens, who else could emit such a divine light? Just when the army fell into chaos, more than a dozen Grade 1 great grandmasters came out from various parts of the army and began to calm the emotions of many soldiers. These Grade 1 great grandmasters were the trusted subordinates of the 10 kings. When the divine light appeared, they did not stay with the kings, but stayed in various parts of the army and took charge of the situation. Because of this, they managed to escape with their lives. After a few hours, the rest of the army finally calmed down. The reason why the 10 kings dared to rebel, in addition to finding a backer, was because of the millions of troops. These millions of troops were all carefully cultivated by the kings and were loyal to the 10 kings. Therefore, they were barely able to calm down under such changes. Otherwise, if it were any other army in the face of such a scene, they would have already completely fled. What should we do now? In the temporary barracks built by the king's army, more than a dozen Grade 1 great grandmasters sat looking at each other with solemn expressions. What should we do? A middle-aged Grade 1 great grandmaster calmed down and looked in the direction of the divine light. Chang'an City, the Grade 1 great grandmaster's heart trembled. He is deputy general of the kingdom of Gojoseon's army. The other soldiers might have thought that the heavenly divine light was a punishment from heaven, but he clearly recognized that the heavenly divine light was coming from Chang'an. What does this mean? It means that this heavenly divine light. Are we still going to rebel? A Grade 1 great grandmaster couldn't help asking. When these words came out, a trace of bitterness flashed on the faces of the other Grade 1 great grandmasters. Rebel? What is there to rebel now? Even the kings are dead. Although they have temporarily pacified the army, there will definitely be problems after a long time. Currently, the king's army seems to have nearly 1 million troops, but in fact, it is extremely fragile. If there is any abnormality, it will face a complete collapse. Let's go back. Let's go back to the fief and wait for the new king to appear. A Grade 1 great grandmaster said. Yes. The situation is chaotic now and the army is leaderless. If we continue to stay, it is very likely that we will be wiped out by the Empire of Tang. The Grade 1 great grandmasters immediately nodded in agreement. Only the deputy general of the kingdom of Gojoseon had a heavy heart. Going back now, waiting for the new king to succeed the throne, and then regrouping is a way. However, will the Empire of Tang give them a chance? And what is the attitude of the person who shot that heavenly divine light? At the same time, in the Taiji Palace, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng and the courtiers were discussing the great changes that happened in Chang'an City not long ago. The world's essence qi within a radius of dozens of miles poured into Chang'an City in an instant. Even if it is now slowly dispersing, it still has a great impact. There is also the heavenly divine light that rose from the depths of the imperial palace, which made the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng worried. Suddenly, at this moment, a scout from the front line quickly walked into the Taiji Palace, knelt on one knee and said loudly, "Your Majesty, there is an urgent report from the front line." Urgent report? The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng was shocked. It was no longer a secret that the vassal king was rebelling and mobilizing millions of troops. What kind of urgent news could there be? The rest of the courtiers were also uneasy. Speak. The Emperor of Tang Lixing glanced at the courtiers and said, the king's army has retreated. The scout was obviously in disbelief, but he still quickly said it. The king's army has retreated? The Emperor of Tang Lixing's eyes widened in disbelief. He even thought that the king's army would come to the city, but he didn't expect the other party to retreat. It should be known that the rebellion of the 10 kings was tantamount to completely offending the Empire of Tang. Anyone can retreat, but the 10 kings can't. Because even if they retreat, the Empire of Tang will not allow the rebellious kings to continue to live. In this case, it is better to gather all the forces of the 10 kings and fight to the death with the Empire of Tang. The Emperor of Tang Lixing can think of this, so can the kings. The reason? The Emperor of Tang Lixing thought quickly and immediately asked. According to the intelligence, it is said that a divine light came from the sky and annihilated the 10 kings. The king's army of millions has no leader, so they chose to retreat. The scout braced himself and said. In fact, when he received this information he also couldn't believe it, so he used the word said to describe it. Logically speaking, as an intelligent scout, the information he conveyed must be accurate, and it is absolutely impossible to use ambiguous words like said, divine light? The Emperor of Tang Lixing only felt a roar in his mind. In a flash, the Emperor of Tang Lixing immediately thought of the divine light that soared into the sky from the depths of the palace not long ago. The time of the two was very close, and the Emperor of Tang just appeared in the palace and the kings died there. That heavenly divine light was used to kill the 10 vassal kings? Thousands of miles away, killing the 10 kings in the midst of millions of troops. The Emperor of Tang Lixing swallowed and only felt like he was dreaming. If what he thought was true, then this kind of method was probably like that of a Buddha. Is there a real god hidden in the palace? The Emperor of Tang Lixing was inexplicably shocked. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.